I wasn't the kind of person who scared easily. After all, you don't take a job as a park ranger in Alaska if you're afraid of the dark, of isolation, or of what might be lurking just beyond the tree line. My name is Mark Sheridan, and back in 1997, I was assigned to range St. Elias National Park. 13 million acres of unspoiled wilderness, towering glaciers, and miles of desolation that would make most people feel insignificant. I liked it that way. At 32, I had served nearly a decade in this line of work and had no plans to leave. This wasn't just a job for me, it was my refuge. I had grown up in Montana, where my father was a grizzled Vietnam vet who taught me how to hunt and track before I was 10. My mother, an amateur geologist, filled my childhood with stories of the Earth's secrets. Those influences made me who I was, a man who felt more at home in a tent under the stars than in any city. My coworkers joked that I was more bear than man. That particular summer, though, was different. Something had started to feel off. The park had seen its fair share of strange occurrences over the years. Missing hikers, bizarre animal mutilations, even the occasional UFO sighting. Most of it could be explained away by natural causes or overactive imaginations. But in June of '97, a pair of campers vanished near Hidden Lake, leaving nothing but a tent filled with their belongings and a sense of dread that settled like fog over the staff. "Sheridan, we've got another search and rescue on our hands," said Karen Lane, my supervisor, as she handed me a manila folder one overcast morning. Karen was a no-nonsense type, her graying ponytail and steely eyes giving her an air of authority. I'd always respected her, but that day I noticed something in her expression. A tightness around the mouth, a hesitance. "Who are we looking for?" I asked, flipping open the folder. "Eric and Sophie Langley. Married couple from Oregon. Been missing 3 days. Last seen at the Hidden Lake trailhead." I scanned their photos. Young, smiling faces. The kind you'd see on postcards or ads for camping gear. It didn't make sense. Hidden Lake wasn't a difficult hike. 3 miles in, 3 miles out. Even beginners could manage it. "What's the catch?" I asked, narrowing my eyes at her. Karen exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. "We sent a team out yesterday to do a preliminary sweep. They came back spooked." "Spooked?" I raised an eyebrow. "Rangers didn't get spooked. They found the Langley's campsite. Tent was intact, no sign of a struggle. But their gear was scattered, like they left in a hurry. And then there's the blood." "Blood?" My stomach tightened. Karen nodded grimly. "Not a lot, but enough to suggest something happened. Problem is, there were no tracks, no drag marks. Just nothing." That evening, I packed my gear and joined 2 other rangers. Paul, a lanky guy with a penchant for bad jokes, and Sam, a quiet, broad-shouldered Alaskan native who could read the wilderness like a book. We set out toward Hidden Lake, the weight of the mystery pressing down on us. The trail was eerily silent, save for the crunch of our boots on the gravel path. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned the area. As we approached the Langley's campsite, I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. The tent was still there, slumped and forlorn, its vibrant orange a jarring contrast to the muted greens and grays of the forest. "Something doesn't feel right," Sam murmured, his dark eyes scanning the surroundings. "Yeah, no kidding," Paul said, forcing a nervous chuckle as he pointed to the ground. "Is that?" A faint smear of dried blood marred the mossy earth just outside the tent. My pulse quickened as I crouched down, examining it. It wasn't much, but Karen hadn't been exaggerating. There were no tracks leading away. It was as if the Langleys had simply vanished into thin air. "Mark, over here," Sam called, his voice low but urgent. He was standing near the edge of the clearing, his gaze fixed on something in the underbrush. I approached, my breath hitching as I saw what had caught his attention. About 10 feet into the trees, the foliage was flattened in a perfect circle, as if something massive had been lying there. The grass was singed at the edges, a faint, acrid smell lingering in the air. "What the hell could have done this?" Paul asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not a bear," I muttered, shaking my head. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. But deep down, I already knew this was no ordinary predator. As the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into shadow, a low sound echoed through the trees. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the growl of a bear. It was something else. Something that sent a shiver down my spine. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Low and wet, like the gurgling of water in a clogged drain. It echoed through the trees, sending an involuntary shiver up my spine. Paul's face went pale, and Sam's hand instinctively went to the hunting knife strapped to his belt. "You guys hear that, right?" Paul whispered, as if speaking louder might provoke whatever had made the noise. Sam nodded, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the clearing. "It's close." The forest seemed to hold its breath as we stood there, frozen, listening for any sign of movement. When the sound came again, closer this time, I finally broke the silence. "All right, stay together. Paul, you cover our six. Sam, take the lead with me. Keep your lights low." We moved cautiously, our flashlights cutting narrow beams through the oppressive darkness. The campsite behind us felt like a distant memory, swallowed up by the surrounding wilderness. Every crunch of leaves underfoot felt deafening, every snap of a twig a potential harbinger of something terrible. "Do you think it's an animal?" Paul asked, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't know," I admitted, which wasn't exactly comforting. I'd encountered all sorts of predators in my years as a ranger. Bears, wolves, even the occasional wolverine. But this felt different. Predators didn't announce themselves like this. They were stealthy, calculated. Whatever was out here wanted us to know it was watching. About 20 yards from the flattened circle in the grass, Sam stopped abruptly. He held up a hand, signaling for silence. I followed his gaze to a cluster of trees ahead, where something glinted faintly in the moonlight. "Do you see that?" he asked quietly. I squinted, stepping closer. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, branches catching the reflection of our flashlights. But as I focused, I realized it was something metallic. I approached cautiously, brushing aside the undergrowth to reveal what looked like a trail camera. "What's a camera doing out here?" Paul asked, peering over my shoulder. "Hunters sometimes set these up to monitor game trails," I said, though my tone betrayed my unease. This camera was newer than anything I'd seen hunters use, with a sleek, almost military design. Sam reached out and carefully removed it from its mount, turning it over in his hands. There were no markings, no brand name. Nothing to indicate where it had come from. "This doesn't belong to any hunters I know," he said. "Let's take it back to the station," I said, though I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already being watched. As we turned to head back, the forest seemed to come alive around us. The sound came again, louder, more insistent, like it was circling us. The underbrush rustled, and shadows shifted in the corner of my vision. "Move now," I ordered, my voice sharper than I intended. We quickened our pace, adrenaline pumping as the noise grew closer. Paul's breathing was ragged, and even Sam, usually unflappable, had a tense set to his jaw. And then, without warning, it stopped. The silence was deafening, pressing against my ears like cotton. We slowed to a halt, straining to hear anything over the pounding of our hearts. That's when I noticed it. An unnatural stillness in the air, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. "Mark," Sam said quietly, his voice barely audible. He was staring at the ground a few feet ahead, where a set of footprints had appeared in the soft earth. The prints were massive, far larger than any bear or wolf. They had an almost humanoid shape, with long, clawed toes that dug deep into the soil. But what made my blood run cold was the way they abruptly stopped, as if whatever had made them had simply vanished. "This doesn't make sense," Paul muttered, his voice trembling. "It's not supposed to," I replied, my own fear creeping into my voice. We pressed on, our movements hurried and disjointed. By the time we reached the trailhead, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. Karen was waiting for us at the station, her expression hardening when she saw the camera in Sam's hands. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice tight. "About 20 yards from the campsite," I said, watching her carefully. "Why? Do you know what it is?" Karen hesitated, her jaw clenching. "That's classified." "Classified?" Paul echoed, incredulous. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," Karen said sharply, "that you're done with this case. Leave the camera here, and I'll take it from here." Her tone left no room for argument, But as I set the camera on her desk, I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. She was scared. And if Karen Lane was scared, I knew we were in deeper trouble than I'd imagined. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the strange footprints or the guttural sound that haunted my thoughts, but because of Karen's reaction to the camera. In all the years I'd worked under her, I'd never seen her rattled. Karen was a rock, the kind of person who could deal with a bear attack or a stranded hiker without breaking a sweat. But when I handed her that camera, she looked as if she'd seen a ghost. At sunrise, I made my way to the station, hoping to catch Karen before the day officially started. The place was eerily quiet, the early morning light casting long shadows across the walls. Her office door was closed, but I could hear voices inside, low and urgent. I knocked twice, but there was no response. Slowly, I pushed the door open. Karen was standing by her desk, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Across from her was a man I didn't recognize, dressed in a dark suit that screamed government. His face was sharp and clean-shaven, his expression unreadable. "Mark," Karen said, her voice sharp. "This isn't a good time." "Who's this?" I asked, ignoring her attempt to dismiss me. The man turned to face me, his dark eyes cold and calculating. "Special Agent Crawford," he said, flashing a badge that looked vaguely official but offered no details. "I'm here on behalf of the Department of Interior." "Department of Interior?" I echoed. "Since when does the government send suits to deal with missing campers?" Karen shot me a warning look, but Crawford's expression didn't waver. "This is a sensitive matter, Mr. Sheridan. Your cooperation is appreciated but not required." "Appreciated but not required," I repeated, incredulous. "We're talking about two people who vanished without a trace. I'd say that requires a bit more than vague reassurances and classified cameras." Karen stepped between us, her tone firm. "Mark, that's enough. This is out of our hands now. Go home." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the look in Karen's eyes stopped me. She wasn't just scared, she was desperate. Whatever was happening here, she wasn't in control of it, and that terrified her. I left the office, but I didn't go home. Instead, I headed to Sam's place. If anyone could help me figure out what was going on, it was him. Sam lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of the park, surrounded by dense forest. When I arrived, he was outside, chopping wood, his movements steady and methodical. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, setting down his axe as I approached. "Maybe I have," I replied, recounting the encounter with Crawford and Karen. Sam listened intently, his expression darkening with each word. "They're covering something up," he said when I finished. "That camera wasn't left out there by accident." "You think they know what's out there?" I asked. Sam nodded slowly. "I've heard stories. My grandfather used to talk about creatures in the woods. Things that didn't belong. He called them Tunuak. The Watchers. Said they've been here longer than any of us." "Tunuak," I repeated, the word foreign and heavy on my tongue. "What are they supposed to be?" Sam hesitated, his gaze drifting to the tree line. "Not animals. Not people. Something in between. They don't leave tracks unless they want to. And when they come for you, there's no running." The memory of the footprints at the campsite sent a chill down my spine. "You think that's what we're dealing with?" "I don't know," Sam admitted. "But whatever it is, it's not something we should ignore." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves outside, felt like a harbinger of something sinister. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps that made my heart skip a beat. Sam was already on his feet, his knife in hand. He motioned for me to stay back as he opened the door, revealing Paul on the other side, his face pale and his breathing erratic. "Paul," I said, stepping forward. "What's going on?" "They're gone," he stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "Who's gone?" Sam asked, his voice calm but firm. "The team. Karen sent out another search team this afternoon. They never came back." Paul's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Another search team, gone without a trace. Whatever was out there wasn't just a threat. It was hunting. And if we didn't figure out what it was, we'd be next. Paul's revelation struck like a hammer blow, leaving a hollow silence in its wake. Sam and I exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between us. If another team had disappeared, we couldn't sit idle. Whatever was out there wasn't going to stop with just the campers or the search party. Start from the beginning, Sam said, motioning for Paul to sit. What happened? Paul dropped into the chair near the cabin's small table, running a trembling hand through his hair. Karen sent out a 3-man team around noon to follow the trail from the campsite. She didn't want us involved after. He trailed off, his gaze flickering to me. After the camera, I finished for him. Paul nodded. She was acting weird, nervous. Kept saying she wanted to wrap things up quietly. Around 6, I tried to radio the team to check in, but there was nothing. Just static. Karen wrote it off as bad reception, but I could tell she didn't believe it. When it got dark and they still hadn't returned, she locked herself in her office and wouldn't let anyone else go out to look. She knows more than she's letting on, Sam muttered, his jaw tight. I leaned forward, my mind racing. We can't wait for her or that Crawford guy to tell us what's going on. If we don't act, more people are going to disappear. Sam nodded in agreement, but Paul's face twisted in fear. Are you insane? Whatever's out there isn't going to stop. I cut him off. Paul, I need you to trust me. We'll be careful, but we can't let this thing keep picking people off. Paul hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. All right. But if we're doing this, we need to be ready for anything. The 3 of us spent the next hour gathering supplies. Flashlights, flares, a rifle Sam kept hidden under his bed, and a map of the area. Sam insisted on bringing his grandfather's knife, an old but wickedly sharp blade engraved with symbols I didn't recognize. What's that for? Paul asked, eyeing the knife. Protection, Sam said simply, slipping it into a sheath at his side. We left the cabin just after midnight, the forest cloaked in an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow the beam of our flashlights. The air was cold and damp, carrying with it a faint metallic tang that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. This is a bad idea, Paul muttered, but he followed close behind us. We started at the campsite, retracing the route the search team had taken. The clearing looked different at night, the flattened grass and burned-out fire pit taking on an almost sinister appearance in the dim light. Tracks, Sam said, kneeling near the edge of the clearing. I crouched beside him, my heart sinking as I saw what he meant. The same massive, clawed footprints we'd found earlier stretched away into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. They're fresh, Sam said grimly. We followed the tracks in silence, the only sounds the crunch of our boots on the forest floor and the occasional rustle of leaves overhead. The deeper we went, the more the air seemed to change. It was heavier now, almost electric, and the metallic scent grew stronger. Then we found the first sign of the search team. A torn jacket snagged on a low branch, its sleeve darkened with what I could only assume was blood. Jesus, Paul whispered, his face pale. Stay focused, I said, though my own voice was tight. We pressed on, the tracks leading us to a narrow ravine. As we descended, the air grew colder, the oppressive feeling pressing harder against my chest. At the bottom, we found the remains of a campsite, or what was left of it. A mangled tent lay in a heap, its fabric shredded and smeared with dark stains. Scattered around it were broken tools, a smashed radio, and something that made my stomach turn. A single boot, its laces still tied. No bodies, Sam said quietly, his grip tightening on his rifle. Not yet, I replied, though the thought offered little comfort. As we stood there, the sound from before echoed through the ravine, louder and more menacing than ever. Paul froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand. It's here, he whispered. The shadows around us seemed to shift, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move. A tall, thin figure with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. It disappeared before I could fully register it, but the sense of being watched was undeniable. Back to back, Sam ordered, his voice low but steady. We formed a tight circle, our flashlights darting through the darkness. The sound came again, this time from a different direction, followed by the faint crunch of leaves. Whatever it was toying with us, circling, waiting. What do we do? Paul asked, his voice shaking. We stand our ground, I said. though my hands were clammy on the flashlight. The noise grew louder, closer, until it was all around us. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. For a moment, the silence was almost worse. Then Sam whispered, "It's gone." But I knew better. It wasn't gone. It was watching, waiting. And it wasn't going to stop until we were all either dead or gone. The silence stretched long enough to feel like hours, though I knew it was only minutes. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, and I could hear Paul struggling to keep his from hitching into outright panic. Sam's flashlight beam swept methodically across the ravine walls, his grip on the rifle unwavering. "Whatever it is, it's playing with us," he murmured, barely loud enough for us to hear. "We need to move," I whispered, scanning the shadows. "We're sitting ducks out here." Sam nodded. "Up the ridge, toward higher ground. If it's tracking us, we'll have a better chance of spotting it coming." Paul didn't argue, though the look on his face told me he was close to breaking. We climbed the ravine's steep incline as quickly and quietly as we could, our flashlights illuminating only the jagged rocks and sparse undergrowth directly in front of us. Every few steps, I'd glance back, half expecting to see something lurking in the dark. We reached the top of the ridge, and I allowed myself a moment to catch my breath. The forest stretched out below us, an endless expanse of black silhouettes against the faint glow of the moon. It was beautiful in a way, but also utterly terrifying. Whatever was out there didn't belong, and the vastness of the wilderness only made us feel smaller and more vulnerable. Sam crouched by a fallen log, peering down at the ravine. "I don't see anything," he said, his voice barely audible. "That doesn't mean it's not there," I replied. Paul was about to say something when a low, rumbling growl cut through the air. It wasn't the noise we'd heard before. This was deeper, more primal, and impossibly close. "Move," Sam barked, and we bolted, abandoning any pretense of stealth. The forest blurred around us as we ran, branches tearing at our clothes and skin. The growl followed, growing louder, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of something crashing through the underbrush. "It's right behind us," Paul screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "Keep going," I shouted, though I didn't dare look back. We broke into a clearing, and Sam skidded to a halt, raising his rifle. "Light it up," he ordered. Paul and I swung our flashlights toward the tree line just as the thing emerged. My heart seized in my chest at the sight of it. It was tall, easily 8 feet, and hunched, its elongated limbs moving with an unnatural, almost insect-like fluidity. Its skin was dark and mottled, like charred wood, and its eyes glowed faintly, the same eerie yellow I'd glimpsed in the ravine. "What the hell is that?" Paul choked out, stumbling backward. The creature let out a deafening shriek, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my skull, and charged. Sam fired, the rifle's crack splitting the air, but the thing barely flinched. "Run!" Sam yelled, firing again as he backed away. We sprinted toward the far side of the clearing, the creature closing the distance with horrifying speed. It moved almost silently despite its size, its elongated limbs propelling it forward in long, loping strides. I tripped on a root and hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Paul stopped to help, yanking me to my feet as the creature bore down on us. Sam threw a flare at it, the red light briefly illuminating its grotesque form, and for the first time it hesitated, recoiling from the brightness. "It doesn't like the light," I gasped, grabbing another flare from my pack. "Use them," Sam shouted, lighting a second flare and hurling it toward the creature. Paul and I followed suit, the flares creating a fiery perimeter around us. The creature paced just outside the circle, its glowing eyes fixed on us. It hissed, the sound low and menacing, but it didn't come closer. "What now?" Paul asked, his voice trembling. "We hold our ground," Sam said, his eyes never leaving the creature. "If it wants us, it's going to have to come through fire." The standoff felt like it lasted forever. The creature circled, testing the edges of the flare's light, but it didn't cross. Its eyes never wavered, watching us with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. Finally, with one last hiss, it retreated into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. "Is it gone?" Paul whispered, his voice barely audible. "For now," Sam said, his tone grim. We didn't move for what felt like hours, waiting for the creature to return. When it didn't, Sam finally spoke. "We need to get back to the station. Karen needs to hear about this." "She already knows," I muttered, the memory of her reaction to the camera fresh in my mind. "She's known all along." Sam gave me a sharp look but didn't argue. We extinguished the remaining flares and began the long trek back, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig making my heart race. As we neared the station, a sinking feeling settled in my gut. Karen wasn't just hiding something. She was complicit. And whatever this thing was, it wasn't done with us yet. By the time we reached the station, the sky had begun to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The faint glow did little to ease the tension clinging to us like a second skin. Sam carried the rifle slung over his shoulder, his knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. Paul trailed behind, glancing over his shoulder every few steps as if expecting the creature to reappear. Karen was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed and her face pale. Behind her, Crawford leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable but his eyes cold and calculating. "You're alive," Karen said, her voice flat. "Not for lack of trying," Sam snapped. "We saw it, Karen. We know." Her jaw tightened, and she exchanged a look with Crawford. "Inside, now." "No," I said firmly, stepping forward. "No more half-truths or cryptic warnings. You're going to tell us everything. What that thing is, what it's doing here, and why you've been covering it up." Karen hesitated, but Crawford cut in. "You think you're entitled to the truth? You have no idea what you've stumbled into." "Then enlighten us," Sam said, his voice cold. "Because whatever that thing is, it's not stopping. More people are going to die unless we do something." Crawford's gaze hardened, but Karen raised a hand to silence him. "Fine," she said, her voice heavy with resignation. "You want the truth, you'll get it. But you're not going to like it." We followed her inside, where she locked the door behind us and drew the blinds. The room felt claustrophobic, the air thick with unspoken tension. Karen motioned for us to sit at the table, but none of us complied. "That thing," she began, her voice low, "is not natural. It's not even from this world." Paul let out a nervous laugh. "You're kidding, right?" Karen shook her head. "I wish I were." In the 1960s, a government research team discovered something buried deep in the permafrost about 50 miles north of here. They called it Project Eden. The details are classified, but from what I've been able to piece together, they unearthed something. A creature or a remnant of one. They studied it, experimented on it, but they didn't realize what they were dealing with. "What happened?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "They lost control," Karen said simply. "The site was abandoned, and the project was buried. Literally and figuratively. But whatever they woke up didn't go back to sleep. It's been wandering ever since, hunting, feeding." "Feeding on what?" Sam asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Karen hesitated. "It's not just the flesh," she said finally. "It feeds on fear, on the life force of its victims. That's why the bodies are never found. It drains them completely, leaving nothing behind." Paul sat down heavily, his face pale. "This is insane." "No," I said quietly. "It explains everything. The missing campers, the search teams, the way it toyed with us last night. It's intelligent, predatory, and it's not going to stop." Karen nodded. "That's why I've been trying to contain it. Crawford and we were brought in to clean up the mess, to keep the truth from getting out." "Contain it?" Sam barked. "You're failing, Karen. People are dying." "You think I don't know that?" she snapped, her composure cracking. "Every time we think we've cornered it, it slips away. It's like it knows what we're planning." "Because it does," Crawford said grimly. "It's connected to us somehow. It can sense our thoughts, our intentions." "Then how do we stop it?" I asked. Karen looked away, her silence more damning than any answer she could have given. "There has to be a way," Sam insisted. "A weakness, something we can use." "There might be," Karen admitted reluctantly. "The research team left behind files, notes. They're locked in a bunker near the original site. If we can get to them, we might find something useful." "Then let's go," I said, already moving toward the door. It's not that simple, Crawford said. The bunker's been sealed for decades. And the creature, it knows the area better than anyone. It won't let us get there without a fight. We don't have a choice, Sam said. If there's even a chance we can stop this thing, we have to try. Karen nodded, her expression grim. All right. But if we're doing this, we do it my way. No heroics, no splitting up. We stick together, and we move fast. As we gathered our gear and prepared to head out, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The creature was out there, watching, waiting. And if Karen was right, it already knew we were coming. But fear wasn't an option anymore. Not if we wanted to survive. The trail to the abandoned bunker felt like a death march. The early morning light filtered weakly through the canopy, doing little to dispel the oppressive weight of the forest. Karen led the way, her movements sharp and deliberate, while Crawford trailed behind, his hand never straying far from the sidearm strapped to his hip. Sam and I flanked Paul, who was uncharacteristically silent, his face pale and drawn. We've got 3 hours tops before the weather turns, Karen said, glancing at the sky. This far north, the snow can come fast and hard. We don't want to be out here when it hits. Assuming we even make it that far, Crawford muttered, his eyes scanning the trees. I tightened my grip on the flare gun Karen had handed me before we set out. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. My pack was loaded with flares, spare batteries, and a map that felt increasingly useless with every step. The terrain was unrelenting. Steep inclines, loose rocks, and patches of snow that threatened to swallow our boots. How much farther? Sam asked, his voice low but steady. Another mile, maybe less, Karen replied without looking back. Stay sharp. It's probably already watching us. Her words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I'd felt it too. A presence just out of sight, keeping pace with us. The forest seemed alive with whispers, the rustling of branches and the crunch of snow beneath our boots blending into an eerie symphony. Paul suddenly stopped, his head snapping toward the tree line. Did you hear that? We froze, the silence stretching taut. Then it came. A growl that seemed to reverberate through the ground. It's close, Crawford said, drawing his weapon. Move, Karen ordered. We're too exposed here. We quickened our pace, the growl growing fainter but never disappearing entirely. The air grew colder, the trees thinning as we approached a rocky outcrop that jutted out like a jagged scar on the landscape. There, Karen said, pointing to a rusted metal hatch partially buried under snow and debris. That's the entrance. Sam and I rushed forward, clearing the hatch while Karen and Crawford kept watch. It took both of us to heave the thing open, the hinges screeching in protest. A rush of stale, icy air greeted us, and my flashlight illuminated a narrow ladder descending into darkness. Paul, you first, Karen said, motioning him forward. He hesitated, his face pale, but Sam gave him a reassuring nod. We've got your back. One by one, we climbed down, the ladder groaning under our weight. The bunker was colder than I'd expected, the air thick with the scent of rust and decay. My flashlight beams swept over walls lined with faded warning signs and peeling paint. The words, Project Eden, stenciled above a heavy steel door at the far end of the corridor. Crawford, help me with this, Karen said, gesturing to the door. The two of them managed to force it open, revealing a room filled with filing cabinets, dusty computers, and a massive map pinned to one wall. Red circles marked various locations, including one directly over our current position. This is it, Karen said, her voice tinged with relief. The original research notes should be here. Sam and I began rifling through the cabinets while Karen booted up one of the ancient computers. Paul hovered near the doorway, his flashlight flickering as he scanned the corridor. Find anything? Crawford asked, flipping through a stack of yellowed documents. Mostly technical jargon, Sam replied, tossing a file onto the desk. None of it makes any sense. Karen cursed under her breath. The files are encrypted. Of course they are. As she worked, the bunker's oppressive silence began to feel suffocating. Paul shifted nervously, his flashlight beam jerking erratically. Can we not take too long? He whispered. I don't like being trapped down here. We'll leave as soon as we find something useful, Karen said, her tone clipped. But before she could say more, a deep, echoing thud reverberated through the bunker. We all froze, the sound unmistakable. A heavy, deliberate step coming from above. "It's here," Paul whimpered, his voice barely audible. "Quiet," Karen hissed, drawing her pistol. The thudding grew louder, each step deliberate, methodical. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away from the door, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "It can't get in here, right?" Paul asked, his voice trembling. "Not unless it figures out how to work the hatch," Crawford muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. A deafening crash cut him off, the sound of metal screeching and twisting. My stomach dropped as the thuds turned into a relentless pounding, the hatch buckling under the creature's assault. "We need to go," Sam said, his voice tight. Karen grabbed a stack of papers and a hard drive, stuffing them into her pack. "There's a secondary exit through the maintenance corridor. It's a tight squeeze, but it'll get us out." We followed her into a narrow passage, the walls closing in around us. The pounding grew louder, accompanied by a shrill, keening wail that made my blood run cold. "Faster," Karen urged, her voice barely audible over the noise. The corridor ended at another hatch, this one smaller and rusted shut. Sam and I threw our weight against it, the metal groaning before finally giving way. We spilled out into the open air, the cold biting at our faces as we scrambled to our feet. Behind us, the bunker shuddered, the creature's wails echoing into the forest. Karen turned to us, her expression grim. "We bought ourselves some time, but this isn't over. Whatever that thing is, it's not going to stop until it gets what it wants." "What does it want?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. Karen's gaze met mine, her eyes filled with a weary kind of dread. "Us." And with that, the forest swallowed us once more, the creature's distant cries haunting our every step. I've been a park ranger for over 20 years, patrolling the trails of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where the mist clings to the trees and the hills roll on forever. My name is David Crow, and I'm a proud member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I've seen my share of wild bears, stubborn hikers, and strange things in the woods. But there are some stories that never made it into the reports, stories that most folks wouldn't believe even if I told them. Still, I think it's time someone did. The Blue Ridge Mountains are beautiful, no doubt about it. The way the sun sets behind the peaks, turning the sky into a canvas of gold and pink, the way the rivers carve through the valleys. It's like a piece of heaven. But there's another side to this place, a side that's been here long before the first settlers arrived, long before my people walked these lands. It's a side that most people don't know about, and those who do rarely speak of it. I've always felt a connection to these mountains. They're a part of me, and I'm a part of them. But even as a child, my elders would tell me and the other kids to stay away from certain places. Places where the trees grew too close together, where the air felt too still, too heavy. They'd say, "Don't wander off the trails after dark. Don't follow any voices you might hear in the woods. And whatever you do, stay far away from the old stone circles." I never really understood what they meant until I started working as a ranger. It was early spring, the first warm spell after a long, cold winter. The kind of day that makes people want to get outside, breathe the fresh mountain air, and stretch their legs. I was on my usual patrol, checking the trails and making sure everything was in order. That's when I met a hiker. Tourist by the look of him. A middle-aged man, probably in his 50s, with a big grin and a brand new backpack that looked like it had never seen dirt. He was friendly, asking me about the best trails and the safest places to camp. "Anywhere but up near Pine Ridge," I told him. "Especially not near the old stone circle." His eyes lit up with curiosity. "Stone circle? Sounds interesting. Why not?" I've learned to be careful about how I answer questions like that. Most people don't take kindly to talk about spirits and old stories. "It's just a tricky spot," I said. "Easy to get lost. Plus, the terrain's rough. People have gotten hurt out there." He seemed to take my advice at first, nodding along, but I could see the gears turning in his head. A couple of hours later, I caught sight of him again, headed straight for Pine Ridge. I called out, told him it wasn't safe, but he just waved me off with that same grin. I had a bad feeling then, one I couldn't shake. That night, as the sun dipped low behind the peaks, I got a call. It was from another ranger station, saying they'd had reports of someone shouting deep in the woods near Pine Ridge. I knew it had to be him. I grabbed my flashlight, radioed in, and headed up the trail. The deeper I went, the more the woods seemed to close in around me. The branches overhead knitted together like the web of a giant spider, blocking out the moonlight. The air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, clinging to the forest floor like something alive. My flashlight barely cut through it, and then I heard it. A voice calling out. "Hello, is anyone there?" It was the hiker's voice, but something about it sounded off. It echoed strangely, like it was bouncing around inside my head. I called back. "It's Ranger Crow. Stay where you are. I'm coming to you." The voice called again, softer this time. "Help, over here." I kept moving, but the more I walked, the more I realized the voice wasn't coming from any one direction. It seemed to drift, floating on the air, always just out of reach. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and that's when I saw it. The stone circle. There's more than one in these mountains, but this one is old. Real old. The stones were worn, covered in moss and lichen, half sunken into the earth. They formed a rough circle, maybe 20 feet across, with an eerie emptiness at the center. The voice came again, louder, from the middle of the circle. "Help me, please." I should have turned back right then. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to run, but something else held me there, some strange compulsion to step closer. I took one step, then another, my boots crunching on the fallen leaves, and that's when I saw him. The hiker. He was standing at the edge of the circle, facing away from me, his body rigid and unnatural. I called out to him, but he didn't move. I took another step, and suddenly he turned around. His face was blank, his eyes wide and empty, staring right through me. His mouth moved, but the voice that came out wasn't his. It was deeper, raspier, like the scraping of stones. "Leave this place." Then he was gone. Just like that, he vanished into the mist. I backed away, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw them. Shadowy figures moving between the trees, circling me. I knew what they were. My grandmother had warned me about them. The Unwitsunsti, the little people. Mischievous, but sometimes dangerous. They live in these mountains, and they don't take kindly to trespassers. I didn't need another warning. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was out of those woods and back on the main trail. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my hands were shaking, but I didn't look back. The next morning, a search party went out. They never found the hiker. No sign of him. Not a scrap of clothing, not a footprint. It was as if he'd never existed. Officially, he's just another lost tourist who wandered too far off the trail. But I know better. I know what I saw, and I know what those mountains took. I'm not saying don't visit the Blue Ridge Mountains. They're beautiful, and there's much to love about them. But respect them. Stay on the trails, don't wander off after dark, and if you hear a voice calling to you from deep in the woods, don't follow it. And whatever you do, stay far away from the old stone circles. Some things in these mountains are older than time, older than us. They don't care for our presence, and if you're not careful, you might just end up like that hiker. Swallowed whole by the mist, never to be seen again. I'm a county park ranger. My beat includes a big lake and an even bigger campground. I enforce rules, patrol the water, and troubleshoot electrical hookups when campers can't tell the difference between 30 and 50 amp plugs. I have to admit, the park is pretty pathetic. An uninspiring spread of dusty, eucalyptus-dotted scrubland ringed by barren hills. The only real attraction is the artificial lake. 5,000 filthy acres of swimmable, fishable, boatable water. You'll never catch me touching that water though. One year they drained some of it and found a layer of human shit 3 feet deep. Now look, I used to be a cop. I've smelled dumpster corpses in the dog days of summer and hoarder houses crowded with dead animals. But the smell of that giant underwater shit cake baking in the July sun tops it all. Anyhow, ours is the only campground this side of the county with a constant, active ranger presence. There's good reason for it. It's a huge, rural park. We have issues with vagrants and meth cookers. Also, anytime you pack hundreds of drunk campers in tight quarters, a few yards from the water, you're going to have problems. People drown. Trailers catch fire. Idiots pilot boats when they're drunk and end up killing each other. Body parts wash up pretty regularly. Fingers, toes, the occasional limb. Legacies, I guess, of accidents and unalives. At least once a summer, some gangbanger shoots a rival gangbanger and traumatizes everyone in the park. Yet they keep coming every summer without fail. Now, park rules dictate that the lake stays empty from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. No swimmers, no boaters, no exceptions. So when a camper complained about a rogue midnight sailor disturbing the peace in the wee hours of July 26th, I had to take care of it. Stepping out of the air-conditioned ranger station into the hot night was a special kind of torture. Heat descended immediately, thick and suffocating as a quilt, so dense it felt hard to breathe. Moving through it was like walking through water. I could almost see it. Veils of soft red and bruised purple, shimmering just past the boundary of human perception. It was a little better out on the water. Still dispiritingly hot, but thinner, somehow breathable. I steered the patrol boat past the dock and circled the perimeter. It took a while. The lake's almost 8 square miles and the boat's a puttering little relic of a bygone age. I shut it off periodically, listening for the telltale echo of a motor. Nothing. Just wind and the lapping of water against the boat. The lake has a few man-made islands. Nothing fancy, just mounds of dirt covering infrastructure access points. When the perimeter proved empty, I decided to check them out. I pulled close to the biggest one and killed the engine. Here, far away from the RVS and tents and campfires, the temperature was almost bearable. I looked up impulsively. A vast array of pale stars spiraled across the velvet sky. I caught sight of the Big Dipper and smiled wistfully. What I'd give to be able to fly, to float up into the tatters of cold, wet clouds and drift under the starlight. I shook myself and scanned the island. Just rocks, litter and dry vegetation, and their unsettling shadows. I heaved a sigh and continued the search. Right around the time distance and darkness reduced the island to a dim shadow, I sighed again and shut off the boat. I looked up the sky and frowned. The stars were different. In the early hours, stars have a high, cold look to them. But these were warm and multicolored. Yellow, gold, swampy green and dim, dour red. I'm a little fuzzy on my constellations, but I know the Big Dipper. I'd just seen it. But it was gone. In its place were flowery arrays, like fireworks set off at a great height and frozen in place. A shudder crawled down my back. I spun around, dimly aware that my heart was pounding, and saw a boat. Relief and irritation shot through me. I pulled up beside it, throwing on every light I had. The harsh white illumination showed 2 figures sitting in a motorboat. A little boy and an old man. My stomach dropped unpleasantly. He had some kind of facial injury. One of his wide, round eyes drooped past the spot where his cheekbone should be, and his head was uneven and unpleasantly small. 4 pink scars bubbled across his face, stark and strange in the harsh light. Several black garbage bags were crumpled on the floor of the boat, atop which an open tackle box lay. "Are you y'all kidding me?" I asked brusquely. "You seen the rules? Nobody on the water after 10 p.m. It is now 2 in the morning, so what do you think you're doing?" "Night fishing," the boy mumbled. The man stood up. "I didn't know, officer. I thought I'd take him out on the water. We don't like going in the daylight." He smiled thinly. The effect was objectively ghastly, but oddly heart-wrenching. People stare. Makes it kind of hard for me. I'd been ready to ticket them with the highest fine I could impose, but faced with the reality of it, a father and son, trying to make memories in a world that didn't even want them to exist, I couldn't do it. "I understand. I do, and I'll let you off this time. But we have rules here. People are trying to sleep, all right? I'll escort you back to shore." The pair exchanged a weird glance. Then the man nodded. "Okay. Thank you, officer. Thank you." He turned and lost his balance briefly. His coat fell open, revealing a familiar uniform. A golden star glimmered on his chest. A sheriff badge. I blinked, and suddenly his coat was closed again, obscuring the clothing beneath. Just then, the boy slipped something overboard. It hit the water with a loud plop. "What was that?" I barked. "You need help fishing it out." The boy shook his head, white face practically glowing. "And no, it was just a nothing." I turned my flashlight on the water and caught a glimpse of something long, ragged, and pale drifting down. Blood clouded behind it like watercolor. A human arm. My hand flew reflexively to my duty belt. "Hold still. Don't you gotta move." At that moment, something huge and white erupted from the murk, slithering along the side of the motorboat. An enormous ribbon of moonlight, cutting through the water like a phantom. I watched, stunned, as that ribbon caught the arm and began to eat. "What is that?" I barely recognized my own voice. "What the hell, what are you people doing?" The man licked his lips and tried to give me another smile. "It defies nature as we know it. If we feed it, it stays small. If we don't feed it, it grows." He was trembling, I noticed. Trembling so hard his coat fluttered. "We can't let it grow anymore. It's already pulling the other world through to ours, like thread through a needle. When it gets enough thread, it'll start making stitches." I looked up at the sky again. Firework constellations, pulsing in 1,000 colors that were too warm and far too strange. Then that long, eerie wraith whipped at my boat, hitting it with enough force to make me lose my balance. I fell against the railing as the creature surfaced. "Don't look," the man wailed. But he was too late. I caught a glimpse of an awful face, predatory yet strangely unformed, with hollow dark eyes and a gaping, yawing mouth spiked with warm, pulsing lights like stars. I closed my eyes and prayed as the boat creaked and the water lapped. After a long time, the boy squeaked, "It's full. We can go now." He didn't need to tell me twice. About halfway across the lake, I heard the rumble of a motor and looked back. The man and the boy and their little motorboat were behind me. The man gave me an encouraging smile. I looked away and shuddered. Then, heart pounding so heavily I felt ill, I turned to the sky. The stars were as they should be, pale and cold, arranged in familiar constellations. There was the Big Dipper, shining down like an old friend. I breathed a sigh of relief as I approached the shore. Ever since that night, I've been telling myself that I had a nightmare. Or even a hallucination. Maybe I'm ill, too ill to be a ranger. Too ill to have any job. But something happened a few days later. Something I can't get out of my mind. Something that scares me more than I've ever been in my life. On July 28th, a woman found a leg on the shore of my lake. No one knows where it came from. Stories are flying all around the county. It was a person who unalived himself. It must belong to a girl who's been missing for a few months. It's just related to a tragic accident. The authorities won't drain the lake to look for the rest of the body. They say it's impossible, that 5,000 acres is too much. Even to look into a potential murder. The thing is, they emptied it out a while ago just to clean up some shit. They absolutely can drain the lake if they want to, but maybe they know better than to try. It was October 1st, 2019, in Los Padres National Forest near Santa Barbara, California. It was the worst night of my life. I went on a solo backpacking trip, and I had mapped out a loop trail which I didn't really know if possible. I didn't know this area very well, and I didn't think the trail had been maintained for over a dozen years. My guess is that it would be about 50 miles, but I really needed to figure out what I was planning on doing in 3 days. But I had enough food for 5. About 7 minutes into my hike, I found this beautiful campsite area with a waterfall and natural swimming hole. I didn't make it as far as I would have liked to on my first day, but I couldn't pass up swimming in this beautiful creek in this slot canyon. I set up my hammock, went for a swim, ate some dinner, and turned in early. I figured if I hit the hay early, I'd get up before sunrise and get back on pace. I woke up about an hour later to find that dreadful feeling of being watched. It was absolutely horrible. There's only a sliver of light left from the sunset, so I decided I would pitch a tent, then rain tarp on and go back to sleep. I set up the tent faster than I've ever set up a tent before. I felt as if I was being watched the entire time. I crawled in and tried to force myself back to sleep. I guess the tent gave me a false sense of security, out of sight and out of mind. I fell back asleep. Several hours later, at about 2 in the morning, I was woken by a whistle coming from up the creek. I sat up in my tent listening. I didn't hear any birds, crickets, or anything. I don't even think I remember hearing the creek or waterfall. But 5 minutes passed, and as soon as I laid my head down, I heard the same whistle again from about 200 yards up the creek. I sat back up, my eyes as big as saucers, just listening. I knew that this wasn't a bird or any wildlife. I sat perfectly still in my tent and listened. I then heard another whistle from 200 yards down the creek this time. The original whistler up creek quickly responded to the whistler down the creek, then straight up the cliff side in the canyon above me. I heard a third whistle respond every minute or so. They would take turns whistling. 1 minute, it would be from up creek. The next minute from down creek. Then the following minute up above me on the cliff. They took turns in perfect order, never going out of turn. I listened to this for about half an hour before I realized that the whistles were closing in my tent. The whistles were getting louder and closer. First, it was 200 yards, then 150 yards, then 100 yards, then 50 yards, until all 3 whistlers were right outside my tent. They're whistling down at me. I was shaking in my sleeping bag, terrified. What followed next was the worst experience I've ever had in my 31 years of life. The ground began to shake like an earthquake, and I felt electric shocks going through my body. It was very painful. I think I let out an involuntary yell from the pain. Tears were rolling down my face because I was so terrified. I mustered up my strength and yelled from the top of my lungs, "Leave me alone." Then silence. The electric shock stopped, and the ground stopped shaking. I tried to listen as best I could to any noise while shaking with fear in my sleeping bag. I then heard a stern voice in my head telling me to leave. He sounded angry. It's the same mind speak that I heard years earlier. They then turned and started to walk away from me. I could feel the ground shaking as they left. They then entered the thick of the forest and broke trees and branches till they were all out of range. I stayed awake in my tent all night until first light, and then went back down the way I came to my truck. I could not complete the loop trail. I was going home. I ended up not leaving my bedroom for 3 months other than to get food. I was terrified to even go outside my home. Friends and family started to worry about me finally. I told one of my friends what happened. I even got a therapist who specializes in PTSD and told him everything, probably saved my life. I was probably as close to unaliving myself as I could get. My friend got me back out in the woods and even got me to go overnight camping on several occasions, but I highly doubt I'll ever go solo backpacking in the woods for the rest of my life. This just happened, so nothing is foggy or blurred by memory. Hell, we're still even sitting right where it happened. My friend and I are sitting on his porch between 1 and 1:10 a.m. We're watching TikToks and drinking Monster Important because neither of us is, or was, under any alcoholic influence. We were just sitting here when we heard something fall, and his cat rushed off to where the noise came from. This cat is very territorial and is very defensive of where he lives. So, any other animal on the land would immediately alert him. We heard a cat fight ensue. My buddy instinctively pulls out his knife as he's ready to defend his cat. We run down to where the fight is happening, and my friend is making noises towards the fight, trying to break it up. I see my friend's cat dart away, and we hear a teeth chattering noise. This is all happening near his camper, so as we round his camper, the creature is hiding somewhere. This is when we see it walk out beside his shed, and my friend chases after it. He says it's a brown color, and he saw it running on 2 feet. This man is 6'4", decently built, and a hunter. Seeing it run on 2 legs made him stop in his tracks. My friend has hunted all of his life, from raccoons to woodchucks to deer. Anything in the Ohioan wilderness you can think of. and this made him stop in his tracks. We see it dart under the shed after my friend chases it. After the initial encounter, my friend saw it go under his second shed. He said all he saw was a tail dart under the shed. As I was writing this, my friend heard it growling and got up with his knife. When he got out to where the growls were, he saw it dart back under the shed. Our speculation is that it is a raccoon or possum. But my question is, can raccoons run on their back legs? A report that was originally sent to the Pittsburgh Gazette describes encounters with what the residents of Mahaffey, PA called a wild man. Could it have been a Bigfoot, the wild man of Mahaffey? A dispatch from Mahaffey to the Pittsburgh Gazette says, "The people of this village are trying to solve a mystery. On Saturday, May 26th, a gentleman driving along the road leading from Corwinsville to this place Mahaffey noticed smoke issuing from a pine thicket on the south side of the river a mile below Mahaffey. In the center of the thicket is an old tumble-down log stable, used years ago by lumbermen for their horses. The ground adjacent to the thicket is an open pasture for cattle. On Sunday last, while Mr. Johnston was looking for his cow, he noticed a man suddenly bound out of the stable and make for the woods as if afraid to meet a fellow creature. On other occasions, this same man has been seen, but always fled like a wild animal when observed. Yesterday, Squire W.W. McQuone and Emery Mahaffey made an investigation of the place and found in the old stable a rude bed made of hemlock boughs and a fireplace a few feet from the couch, where the strange individual cooked his meals. No person was to be seen, however. The hermit had evidently noticed the approach of the party and escaped to the mountain a short distance back from his lonely habitation. A den of rattlesnakes, only a few hundred feet from his camp, which is the terror of the neighborhood, must certainly furnish weird music for the lone citizen. The hermit is a man about 40 years of age, with a tall and commanding figure. His hair and beard are unkempt, and he looks as though he has been roughing it for months. Who is he? That is the question the people of Mahaffey are anxious to have answered. I'm from California, but me and my family lived in Atlanta for about 2 years, from 15 to 17 years old. The entire time living there was a saga within itself, but I can remember one specific incident that was unsettling. When we arrived in Atlanta, we stayed in a hotel for some months, looking for places to live. There was this handyman who worked at the hotel. He was a white man, maybe in his mid-40s, large belly, wore glasses, and always dressed in the same camouflage jacket that kinda made him resemble a hunter of some sort. He seemed friendly enough. He would always wave and joke around with all the kids and with my parents, and we were cordial with him. His friendliness started to become excessive towards the end of our stay. It got to the point where he would yell up to us from outside our window. We would call back to him and laugh with him, make light of the situation. But it became uneasy for us when he kept doing it, night after night, patrolling the parking lot. At one point, we just ignored him and turned the light out as if we weren't there. He became even more aggressive, shouting to us and shining a huge flashlight in our window, whistling up to us and joking about how he knew we were still up. He had a weird high-pitched laugh mixed with his southern accent that didn't sound like he was playing around. It was more sinister. In a sadistic, Pee Wee Herman kind of way, I can't describe it. I can't remember everything he said specifically, but there was a comment he made about us one time that made my father very uneasy. He compared him to someone on Unsolved Mysteries lol. There were little things he said about all the kids as well, how cute we were or something to that effect that never sat well with us at all. It came to a breaking point when one day, we went downstairs to our car and saw a hangman figure drawn in the dust on the back window. I'm mixed, as are my siblings. My dad is black, my mom is mixed-raced. We're in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia, the deep south, in a very awkward position. We're totally new to this state. I've never left the West Coast before that point in life. This image creeped everyone in my family out. We knew he was the one who did it. My dad confronted him about it, and he played it off, denied that he meant anything by it at all, and apologized profusely. But the way he did it was in the same weird, joking manner that he talked to us with, so it was very hard to take seriously. This, and the fact that this hotel was robbed at gunpoint in the same week, motivated us to leave immediately. I never saw this man again, though we had many other insanely creepy experiences down south, and after a while we just came back to California and never looked back. The morning air carried a heavy stillness, the kind that comes before a summer storm. My name is Elijah Grayson, and at 34, I've spent most of my life roaming the forests and rivers of the American heartland. Folks around here call me Eli. I stand just over 6 feet tall, lean but sturdy from years of hiking rugged trails. My hair is a mess of dark curls, streaked faintly with gray, and my sun-browned skin tells the story of countless hours spent under open skies. I've always felt more at home under a canopy of trees than a roof of shingles. That's why I took a seasonal job as a ranger at Black Hollow National Park. Tucked into the shadowy expanse of the Midwest, Black Hollow wasn't the kind of place that made glossy postcards. It was old, rugged, and full of whispers. The locals, mostly from the Red Rock Reservation nearby, refused to camp there, and they had stories. Stories they didn't like to tell. "You're brave, Eli, or foolish," Old Chief Heron had said when I stopped by the reservation last week to introduce myself. His weathered face creased into a frown, his gray braids swaying slightly in the breeze. "That forest doesn't want people poking around." "Why?" I'd asked, curious. "What's out there?" He just stared at me with those sharp, hawk-like eyes. "Not everything has a name," he muttered. A week later, standing at the edge of Black Hollow's timberline, his words echoed in my mind. The trees loomed taller here than in any forest I'd known, their bark dark and cracked like ancient skin. Beyond the line, the trails grew wilder, less marked, as if the forest had swallowed any signs of human order. "Eli," a voice jolted me from my thoughts. It was Anna Reynolds, my coworker, jogging up the gravel path to the ranger station. Anna was about my age, with fiery red hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of flora and fauna, but didn't believe in anything she couldn't see or touch. "Hey, Anna." "You're early," I said, leaning against the weathered wood of the station's porch. She smirked, pulling a clipboard from her bag. "Figured you'd need help. First shift alone in Black Hollow can get interesting." Her tone was teasing, but there was an edge to it. I followed her inside, where we reviewed the standard tasks for the day. Trail inspections, wildlife reports, and a routine patrol to check on an overnight camper near the lake. Simple enough. Yet, as we went over the list, an unshakable unease crept over me, like someone had draped a wet blanket across my shoulders. By late afternoon, we split up to cover more ground. I took the east trail, which wound through a dense grove of pine and cedar. The deeper I went, the more the air seemed to change. It grew thick, heavy, and oddly quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just my own boots crunching the dirt. That's when I found it. Nestled among the roots of a massive oak tree was something I couldn't explain. A circle of stones, perfectly arranged, each one etched with symbols I didn't recognize. They looked ancient, older than the forest itself. My gut twisted, and I felt the urge to step back, but curiosity got the better of me. I crouched down and traced the carvings with my fingertips. A sharp, icy wind swept through the grove, chilling me to the bone. I shot to my feet, scanning the trees. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely breaking the oppressive silence. Nothing. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The wind had come and gone in an instant, leaving behind a stillness so complete it pressed against my ears. My hand hovered over the strange stones as if touching them again might stir the air into motion. For a moment, I debated whether to take a picture or leave them undisturbed. Something deep in my gut, call it instinct or a whisper from Chief Heron's warning, told me to walk away. As I straightened up, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was a shadow shifting between the trees, but it moved with purpose. A figure, tall and lean, slipping silently through the forest. "Hey," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Whoever, or whatever." It didn't stop. I took off after it, my boots pounding against the uneven trail. The forest felt alive as I ran, the underbrush clawing at my legs and low-hanging branches snagging my shirt. I caught glimpses of the figure through the trees. Dark hair, bare feet, and something white draped over its shoulders. It didn't look back, didn't slow down. My heart pounded as I pushed harder, determined to close the gap. "Stop," I yelled, skidding to a halt when the figure disappeared behind a moss-covered boulder. I scrambled around it, expecting to find whoever I'd been chasing. Nothing. The forest stood still, as if mocking me. The air felt colder here, and the smell of damp earth was overpowering. I doubled over, catching my breath, and scanned the area. "Hello." My voice was weaker now, the confidence draining with every unanswered call. Behind me, a twig snapped. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat, and saw Anna standing a few yards away. "What the hell are you doing out here, Eli?" she demanded, her arms crossed and a scowl plastered across her freckled face. I saw someone," I stammered, gesturing toward the boulder. "They ran this way." Anna looked at me like I'd sprouted a second head. "No one's out here. I just came from the West Trail, and it's empty." She stepped closer, her boots crunching softly on the forest floor. "Are you sure you're not just spooking yourself?" "I know what I saw," I shot back, but my voice lacked conviction. "They were tall, wearing something white. Maybe one of the locals." "No one from the reservation comes out here," Anna interrupted, her tone sharp. "You know that." We stood there in tense silence, the trees towering above us like silent witnesses. Finally, Anna sighed and gestured for me to follow her. "Come on. Let's head back to the station. It's getting late." Reluctantly, I trailed after her, casting one last glance over my shoulder. The forest seemed to breathe again as we walked away, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves slowly returning. But the unease didn't leave me. Back at the station, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing. Anna busied herself with paperwork while I slumped into a chair, replaying the day's events in my mind. The stones, the wind, the figure in the woods. None of it made sense. Eli. Anna's voice broke through my thoughts. She was standing by the window, her face pale. "Come look at this." I joined her, peering out into the darkening forest. At first, I didn't see what had her so rattled. Then I noticed it, a faint glow coming from the east trail, right where I'd found the stones. It wasn't fire, but something else entirely, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. "What is that?" I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. Anna didn't answer. The glow seemed to pull at something deep inside me, like the beat of a distant drum. Anna's face, usually hardened with her no-nonsense attitude, had softened into something close to fear. "We need to call this in," she said, her voice tight. "Call it in to who?" I asked, unable to tear my eyes away from the eerie light. "What are we even going to say?" "Hi, there's a weird glowing thing in the woods, and we don't know what it is." Anna glared at me. "Fine, but we're not going out there until morning." I shook my head. "I have to see what it is now." "Are you out of your mind, Eli?" she snapped, stepping in front of the door to block me. "It's dark. You've already had one weird encounter, and you don't even know what's out there. And that's exactly why I need to go." My words hung in the air between us, heavy and unyielding. If something's going on in this park, it's my job to figure it out. Anna stared at me for a long moment before letting out an exasperated sigh. "Fine, but I'm coming with you." We armed ourselves with flashlights and radios, though the latter felt useless given how spotty the reception was in Black Hollow. Stepping into the night was like walking into another world. The temperature had dropped sharply, and the moon hung low, casting pale light over the trees. The glow was faint but unmistakable, pulsing like a beacon deeper into the forest. Neither of us spoke as we trudged toward it, the crunch of our boots the only sound. My stomach churned with a mix of excitement and dread. When we reached the spot, the air felt electric, crackling faintly like static. The circle of stones I'd found earlier was now illuminated by the strange light, but it wasn't coming from the stones themselves. It was seeping up from the ground, as if the earth was bleeding light. Anna knelt cautiously, holding her flashlight over the markings. "These symbols, they're not natural, they're carved intentionally." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you recognize them?" I asked. "No," she admitted, her brow furrowed. but they don't look like anything I've seen from local tribes. This is older. Before I could respond, the wind kicked up again, more forceful this time. It carried a low hum that sent shivers down my spine. The trees swayed violently, their branches clawing at the sky, but the circle of stones remained eerily still, as if protected by some unseen force. Anna stood abruptly, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "We shouldn't be here," she said, her voice unsteady. "Eli, we need to leave now. I think." I began, but a sound cut me off. It was faint at first, like a distant echo, but it grew louder with each passing second. A rhythmic chanting in a language I couldn't understand. The sound seemed to come from all around us, reverberating off the trees. "Who's there?" I shouted, spinning in a circle with my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but found nothing. Anna grabbed my arm, her grip like a vice. "Eli, we have to go. Now." Before I could argue, the light from the ground flared brightly, blinding us both. I stumbled backward, shielding my eyes, and when I looked again, the glow was gone. The forest was pitch black, the air heavy and silent once more. Anna's face was pale, her freckles standing out starkly against her skin. "I'm done," she muttered, turning back toward the trail. "Whatever this is, it's not our problem anymore." I hesitated, my gaze lingering on the stones. Something about the place felt unfinished, like it had more to tell me. But Anna was already walking away, and the rational part of me knew better than to stay alone. As we made our way back to the station, the chanting lingered in my mind, repeating itself like a broken record. Somewhere deep in the woods, something was watching us. I could feel it. The station was unnervingly quiet when we returned. Anna slammed the door shut behind us, locking it with more force than necessary. "I'm calling this in," she said, throwing her gear onto the desk. Her hands trembled as she picked up the radio. I dropped into the nearest chair, my legs feeling like lead. My mind replayed the events in the woods. The glow, the chanting, the way the air itself seemed to vibrate with something unearthly. "And what are you going to tell them?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "That something's out there," she snapped, her eyes blazing. "I don't care if they think I'm crazy. People need to stay away from that place." Before I could respond, the radio crackled to life. A deep, distorted voice came through, cutting off Anna's frantic call. "You were warned," it said, slow and deliberate. We froze. Anna dropped the radio like it had burned her, and I stared at it as if it might come alive. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. The radio went silent, leaving only the faint hum of static. I reached for it cautiously, pressing the button to speak. "Who is this?" No answer. Anna backed away, her face pale. "I'm done, Eli. I'm not staying here another night." I couldn't blame her. Part of me wanted to grab my keys and leave, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But something inside me wouldn't let go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was sheer stubbornness. Whatever it was, I couldn't walk away. "We need answers," I said, standing up. "If we leave now, we'll never know what's going on." Anna looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Answers? Are you hearing yourself? There's nothing out there we're supposed to understand, Eli. Whatever this is, it's not for us." "Then why is it here?" I countered. "Why now?" She didn't answer, but her silence was enough. I grabbed a flashlight and my pack, heading for the door. "I'm going back." Anna grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You're insane," she hissed. "If you go out there alone, you're not coming back." "Then come with me," I said, meeting her gaze. "We're rangers, Anna. This is our job." Her grip loosened, but she didn't move. "You're going to get yourself killed." I hesitated, then stepped outside. The night air was colder now, biting against my skin. The forest loomed in the distance, its shadows deeper and darker than before. I had no plan, no idea what I was walking into, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than me. As I approached the east trail, the woods seemed to greet me with a whisper, the trees swaying gently in a wind I couldn't feel. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the faint path ahead. My pulse quickened with every step, but I forced myself to keep moving. Then I saw it again. The figure from earlier, standing motionless at the edge of the trail. It turned slowly, its face hidden in shadow, and raised an arm to point deeper into the forest. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. It didn't respond. Instead, it began to walk, its steps impossibly silent. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I followed. The deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew closer together, their trunks twisting unnaturally. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic like rust. My flashlight flickered, its beam struggling to stay steady. Finally, the figure stopped. It stood at the edge of another clearing, where the stones I'd seen earlier had been rearranged. Now they formed a spiral, leading to a shallow pit at the center. The faint glow had returned, pulsing softly from below. "What is this?" I murmured, stepping closer. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised its hand again, pointing to the pit. My stomach churned, but I couldn't stop myself. I stepped forward, peering into the hole. At first, I thought it was empty. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw something move. A hand, thin, pale, and claw-like, reached up from the darkness. I stumbled back, my flashlight falling from my grasp. The chanting started again, louder this time, echoing through the clearing. The figure stepped aside, as if inviting me to take its place at the edge of the pit. Behind me, the trees seemed to close in, blocking out the sky. The chanting grew deafening as I stood frozen, staring into the pit. The hand clawed at the edge, its nails raking the dirt with a slow, deliberate motion. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were buried in cement. The figure, still silent, gestured again toward the pit, its movements unnervingly slow. The glow pulsed brighter, casting long, writhing shadows across the trees.
"Why?"
Anna's voice cut through the noise, startling me. I turned to see her sprinting into the clearing, her flashlight bobbing wildly in her hand. She skidded to a stop, her face pale as she took in the scene. "What the hell are you doing?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely audible over the chanting. It wants me to look." Anna's eyes darted to the pit, then to the figure. "We're leaving. Right now." Before she could grab my arm, the chanting stopped. The sudden silence was suffocating, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The figure stepped closer to the pit, its shadow stretching impossibly long. "Do you see?" A voice whispered, soft and chilling. It didn't come from the figure, but from everywhere at once, reverberating through the clearing. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "To awaken what sleeps," the voice replied. The ground beneath us trembled, the dirt shifting as if something massive was moving below. Anna grabbed my arm, yanking me backward. "We're not staying to find out what that means," she hissed. But it was too late. The hand emerged fully from the pit, followed by a grotesque arm covered in pale, leathery skin. The creature pulled itself upward, its form shrouded in shadow but undeniably massive. Its movements were deliberate, as though it was savoring its return to the surface. "Run!" Anna screamed, dragging me toward the tree line. We bolted, the forest a blur around us. Branches clawed at my face and arms, the ground uneven and treacherous beneath my feet. Behind us, the chanting started again, louder and more frantic. The trees seemed alive, their trunks twisting and leaning as if trying to block our escape. "Don't look back," Anna yelled, her voice sharp with fear. But I couldn't help myself. I glanced over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. The creature was fully out of the pit now, its form monstrous and alien. Its body was an unnatural combination of bone and sinew, its face obscured by a shifting, smoky veil. It moved with horrifying grace, its limbs too long and joints bending the wrong way. The figure that had led me here stood motionless beside it, its form dwarfed by the towering monstrosity. For the first time, it turned toward me fully, and I caught a glimpse of its face. Or what should have been its face. Instead, there was nothing but smooth, featureless flesh. I stumbled, nearly falling, but Anna's grip on my arm kept me upright. "Focus, Eli," she barked. We burst through the tree line and into the open field near the station. The lights from the building were a beacon in the dark, but they flickered ominously as we approached. Anna slammed the door open, shoving me inside before locking it behind us. Both of us collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. The station felt eerily quiet, the only sound our ragged breathing. "What the hell was that?" Anna finally said, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I admitted, staring at the ground. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what we'd just seen. But it's not over. As if on cue, the lights flickered again before going out entirely, plunging us into darkness. The radio crackled, the distorted voice returning. "You were warned," it said again, slower this time. Anna fumbled for her flashlight, but before she could turn it on, the windows rattled violently. A low, guttural growl filled the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I grabbed her shoulder. "We need to leave, now." "Leave?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "Go where? That thing is out there." "And it's not going to stop," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If we stay here, we're sitting ducks." The growl deepened, and a loud thud shook the station as if something massive had slammed into the side of the building. Anna nodded, her resolve hardening. "All right, let's move." We grabbed what little gear we could carry and made for the back exit. As we stepped outside, the forest loomed ahead, darker and more menacing than ever. Somewhere in the distance, the chanting began again. The air was electric, heavy with a charge that made every hair on my body stand on end. The chanting grew louder as we pushed into the forest, but this time it wasn't distant. It surrounded us, coming from all directions, rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence that felt ancient and alien. Anna led the way, her flashlight cutting weakly through the oppressive darkness. "We need to head for the ridge," she said, her voice tight. "If we can make it to higher ground, maybe we can signal for help." "Help from who?" I shot back, stumbling over an exposed root. "Do you really think anyone will believe us?" She didn't answer, and I couldn't blame her. Deep down, I knew we were on our own. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't something you could explain over the radio or write in a report. The ground beneath us shifted again, a low rumble rolling through the earth. I turned back briefly and saw the glow from the pit growing brighter, spilling through the trees like molten light. The creature was coming. "Faster," Anna urged, practically dragging me along. We broke through a thicket of underbrush, our clothes torn and our faces scratched. Ahead of us, the ridge loomed, its silhouette jagged against the faint glow of the moon. It looked impossibly far, but it was our only chance. Behind us, the growling resumed, louder and closer. The trees swayed violently as if something enormous was forcing its way through. "Do you see that?" Anna whispered, pointing ahead. I followed her gaze and froze. Standing between us and the ridge were three figures, identical to the one I'd followed earlier. They were motionless, their featureless faces turned toward us. "Stay back," Anna yelled, raising her flashlight like a weapon. The figures didn't move. Instead, they raised their arms in unison, pointing back toward the pit. The chanting swelled, the sound vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. I took a step forward, my hands trembling. "What do you want from us?" I demanded, my voice breaking. One of the figures tilted its head, its movements jerky and unnatural. When it spoke, the words weren't its own. It was the same disembodied voice we'd heard before. "Witness." "What does that mean?" Anna shouted, her frustration boiling over. The ground shook violently, and a deafening roar split the air. The trees around us bowed and cracked as the creature emerged fully into the clearing. Its massive form blotted out the light from the pit, its smoky veil rippling like liquid shadow. The figure stepped aside, clearing a path toward the ridge. "This is a trap," Anna muttered, her eyes darting between the creature and the ridge. "Do we have a choice?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed my hand, and we bolted past the figures. They didn't follow, but I could feel their empty gaze on us as we ran. The ridge was steeper than it looked, the rocky incline forcing us to scramble on all fours. The chanting followed us, now accompanied by the creature's guttural growls. I dared a glance over my shoulder and saw it climbing after us, its limbs contorting grotesquely to grip the rocky surface. "We're not going to make it," Anna panted, her voice raw with fear. "Keep going," I shouted, pushing her ahead. "We're almost there." The top of the ridge was within reach when the chanting stopped abruptly. The silence was so sudden and complete that it made my ears ring. I turned to see the creature pause mid-climb, its smoky veil shifting to reveal something glowing within. A core of searing light, pulsating like a heartbeat. The chanting had been replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the creature itself. It wasn't trying to kill us. It was trying to draw us in. "Don't look at it," I yelled, grabbing Anna's arm and pulling her the last few feet to the top. We collapsed on the flat surface, gasping for air. Below us, the creature let out another roar, this one filled with something almost human. Rage, frustration, or perhaps sorrow. "Do you hear that?" Anna whispered. I strained to listen. Beneath the roar, beneath the hum, there was something else. A faint, mournful wail. It sounded almost human. The creature stopped climbing, its body trembling as the wail grew louder. Then, without warning, it turned and retreated, its massive form dissolving into the shadows of the forest. Anna and I sat in stunned silence, watching as the glow from the pit faded into darkness. The forest was eerily quiet again, as if nothing had happened. What was that?" Anna finally asked, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I admitted, my throat dry. "But it's not over." We sat there until the first light of dawn broke through the trees, too afraid to move. When we finally descended the ridge, the forest felt different. The air was lighter, the oppressive weight gone. But the pit was still there, its edges smooth and undisturbed, as if nothing had clawed its way out. And as we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, waiting for the next time someone was foolish enough to step into the woods. My name is Kai, and I am a Native American park ranger from the Navajo Nation. For years, I've patrolled and protected the lands my ancestors have called home for generations. Yet nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I encountered when I was transferred to Alaska. It was supposed to be a temporary post, 6 months, just covering for another ranger who'd broken his leg on a backcountry hike. My superiors assured me it would be simple. The rugged, untouched beauty of the Alaskan wilderness was tempting, and I had been curious about the legends that surrounded it. You see, each land holds its own stories, its own spirits. Our own Navajo tales spoke of spirits in the wind, shapeshifters in the mountains, but Alaska was different. I arrived in the late spring when the days stretched long and twilight barely gave way to darkness. The station was a small outpost tucked away near the edge of the vast Tongass National Forest. The locals were kind but distant, as if they'd learned to keep strangers at arm's length, especially those who asked too many questions. A weathered old man who lived near the station, someone the other rangers called Old Joe, gave me a peculiar warning before I set out on my first solo patrol. "You're not from here," he said in a raspy voice, as his clouded eyes bore into mine. "Respect the land, and if you hear the wind whisper your name, don't answer it. If you see her, don't look. Leave, fast." I'd heard cryptic warnings like this before. Every region has its folklore. In the Southwest, we speak of skinwalkers. In the Midwest, there's talk of wendigos, so I chalked Old Joe's words up to local superstition. But something about his eyes, how they seemed to reflect years of knowing, years of fear, stuck with me. Weeks passed uneventfully. The forests were alive with towering Sitka spruces, thick moss carpeting the ground, and the echo of wildlife that made the isolation feel less intense. I reveled in the peace, though the stillness at times made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Something about the silence in Alaska felt different, more oppressive, as though the land was waiting for something. One evening, I was tasked with checking a remote cabin used by hunters. It was deep in the forest, about a day's hike from the main station. I set off early, the trail twisting through the dense trees, the scent of pine thick in the air. By the time I reached the cabin, the sky was darkening. A deep purple hue spilled over the horizon. I had planned to stay the night, so I settled in, lit a fire, and watched as the flames danced across the walls. That's when I heard it. A low, distant hum, almost like a chant. It was barely audible at first, something you could mistake for the wind. But as the minutes passed, it grew louder, more distinct. A woman's voice, singing in a language I couldn't understand. I froze, my mind racing. The nearest village was miles away, and there were no known hiking parties in the area. The voice seemed to drift from the forest, just beyond the cabin walls. Then I remembered old Joe's warning. If you hear the wind whisper your name. The voice called out again, clearer now, weaving through the trees like it was carried by the night itself. My heart raced. I wasn't about to stick around and find out who, or what, was singing in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, stepping cautiously out of the cabin. The forest was eerily quiet, except for the woman's voice, beckoning, luring me deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I took a few steps toward the sound. It was hypnotic, like a spell woven into the air. Then I saw her. A figure, pale and slender, standing between the trees. Her hair was long, almost reaching the ground, and moved like smoke in the faint breeze. Her eyes, though dark and empty, seemed to pierce through the shadows, locking onto me. She smiled. A cold, unnatural smile. I stood rooted to the spot, my body refusing to move as she stepped closer, her feet barely touching the ground. A chill ran down my spine, and I knew, in that moment, she wasn't human. Suddenly, the singing stopped. Silence enveloped the forest, heavy and thick. The woman tilted her head, her expression unreadable, and then she spoke, whispering my name in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Kai. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, the trees closing in around me. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I reached the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me. For hours, I sat with my back against the door, listening for any sign of her. But there was nothing. Only the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. When morning finally came, I wasted no time packing my things and heading back to the station. I reported what had happened, but no one believed me. They said it was just the isolation getting to me, playing tricks on my mind. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. Before I left Alaska, I saw old Joe one last time. He looked at me with those same knowing eyes and nodded. You saw her, didn't you? He asked, though it wasn't really a question. I didn't answer, but I think he knew. The locals call her the kushtaka, a shapeshifter, a lure, a creature that draws you in with its voice before it steals your soul. Some say it's a trickster spirit, others claim it's something far darker. But whatever it is, it's real. And it's out there, waiting. So, take it from me. Stay far away from Alaska. There are things in those woods you don't want to meet. Not exactly related, but when I was around 5 or 6 years old, my parents took me and my siblings to Australia to visit our grandparents. My grandpa, who was a soldier and quite impressive because he owned a lot of guns, I assure you, I have no intentions of becoming a school shooter, took us to his backyard to camp overnight. As we were about to go to sleep, a snake sneaked into our tent. I saw it and didn't think much of it, other than to inform my grandpa. It turns out the snake was quite venomous, so when he saw it, he grabbed it by the head, twisted its head around, and just yanked it off. Since it was a baby, it was easy to decapitate, and it wasn't too venomous. However, that experience scarred me for a bit, since I was only 6. The act of him ripping its head off was what scared me, not the snake itself, by the way. I handle snakes quite a bit, so that's why I wasn't scared of the snake. Hunted rabbits, cottontail, and jackrabbit when I was a preteen or teen with Dad and his friends. Sometimes we would use dogs to flush rabbits out. One particular outing, the dogs flushed a rabbit out my way. I took aim with my 410 and took it down. Typically, we would dress gut and skin in the field. So my dad and I was dressing this particular kill, and lo and behold, it was pregnant. The mother was dead, but the babies were still very much alive and wiggling in the now discarded uterus. Well, the dogs quickly devoured the unborn rabbits. I went hunting again a few more times, but not as an adult. I prefer the blissful ignorance of not knowing the truth about the circle of life. I've been debating on whether to even mention this. It belongs in the ultra strange and weird category, but I do so in hopes that someone else may have seen or experienced something similar and will come forward to give their account. A few days ago I woke up and thought, now that was one weird dream. Well, at least that is what I keep telling myself. I'm not really sure if it was a dream or not. I was in bed asleep. I woke up suddenly to see an alien face peering down at me. I had just enough time to take note of its most outstanding features, think, wow, to myself, and then immediately drift back into slumber. Shortly after, I woke up. I got up and went to the bathroom, then came back to bed, only to realize that there was blood on the bed. I checked myself and could find nothing amiss, no cuts, scratches, or other means of bloodletting. I was bemused, to say the least. I dressed, left my husband sleeping in bed, and let the dogs outside. I then walked over to my cell phone and tried to wake it up, but it was dead. Now that might not seem like a problem, but when I went to bed, it had a full charge. When the battery died, the phone shut off, and it wasn't going to turn on. I reached for my charge cable and plugged it into my phone, and when the battery icon appeared, it showed the phone had no charge at all. Coincidence? Okay, so let's get this straight. I have a dream that may or may not have been a dream with an alien in my face. There was blood on my sheet and pillow, and my fully charged phone was dead as a doornail. As for the alien, it had bulging, round, fish-like eyes, gill slits where a nose would be. I saw the gills flare open as it exhaled when I opened my eyes, mottled green tinted white skin and knobs and a frill on the head. Hey, it would make a good sci-fi movie, Alien. The thing is, that's pretty much what I saw. Later on in the day, I noticed a tiny needle stick in the top of my right hand, made more noticeable due to bruising. I'm a UFO investigator. I investigate reports of UFOs and aliens. I'm not supposed to experience these things, but then contact with something not of this earth is the driving force behind my search for the truth. In my research as a UFO investigator, I've not been acquainted with fish-like aliens, so I did some checking and found that the Apkallu were a fish-like race that supposedly helped to advance the Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia. There is a problem here. The Apkallu are depicted as being fish-like from the waist down, i.e. mermen. I only saw this chap from the neck up. Listed among the many supposed types of aliens that are here, visit Earth, or make an impact on human civilization, are the amphibians. I could not determine what these beings possibly look like, but they are listed as semi-aquatic. Gills might be a good indication. Some researchers seem to think that greys have a cetacean ancestry, or is it that serious reptilians, with scales and gills, lurk among us? Well, this is all speculation, and hopefully, it was just a silly dream, mixed with eerie coincidences. I was 23 years old in 1989 when I decided to move back to Pennsylvania from Florida. Back then I was a free-spirited female. I had no fear and true faith in God for my protection. I moved in with my brother on his fiancée in an old log cabin deep in the mountains in Lycoming County, Pennsylvania. My room was the attic in the cabin. I liked it because it was warm and at night could open the window that overlooked the porch for a cool breeze. There was a small trout stream that ran beside the cabin. It was perfect. I decided one day I was going to go out and explore the woods, and I did it by myself. I found all kinds of blackberry bushes that were loaded with berries and decided to go out early in the morning and pick berries. I told my brother the next day that I wanted to go pick berries. He offered me his .357 Magnum for protection. He said berry bushes attract bears and I needed something for protection. I told him no thanks, that God would protect me. I took a big paper grocery bag with me to pick berries and flowers. I looked to the sky and it started looking a little dark. The wind was picking up, but I was determined to go pick berries. I started from the back of the cabin and headed up through the waist-high weeds of the brush. I prayed to God for a bright sunny day. I began finding beautiful wildflowers. I was picking those and blackberries. I probably walked a couple of miles from the back of the cabin through the woods and fields across over a power line area and felt like someone or something was watching me. I looked all around and saw two white-tailed does in the grass under the power lines and thought, Oh, it was them watching me. So I continued across, found another big blackberry bush, and began picking again. I didn't mention I had a Walkman and listened to my loud music. Then suddenly I heard a growl that vibrated in my chest. I turned the Walkman off, took my headset off, and listened. I thought it may have been a black bear. I got a little scared and I prayed to God for protection. I looked all around and saw nothing. I walked around to the other side of the huge blackberry bush and saw saliva hanging about 3 feet up on the leaves. I took a stick and checked. It was fresh, but I saw nothing looking out of the ordinary, so I continued with caution, pushing through the woods. I had plenty of berries by this time and wildflowers too. I came across this old cobblestone cabin that was in ruins. I sat down to smoke a cigarette. I looked up at the sky. It had cleared. It was beautiful and sunny. Then I felt this tingling on my arm, almost like a ghost was watching me. Then something is asking me in my mind what I'm doing there. I said I came out to pick berries and flowers. Then it asked me where I was from. I told it I was from Florida, here visiting my brother. I could easily receive and send my answers with no problem. I thought at first it could have been an old Civil War ghost. I told it I needed to head back home now and I left. We mind-spoked for about an hour there at the old ruined cabin. On my way back I got very hot and sweaty, so I took my jacket and off tied around my waist. I heard something say in my mind to take my clothes off. I said no, I'll get all scratched up. It said because you don't have hair. I said yes, animals have hair to protect themselves. I began to become disoriented. I was hot, dizzy, and lightheaded. I thought that I was lost. My dad was a hunter. He always told me if I got lost, listen for water and find it, then follow the stream. You'll find your way back. I did and started following the stream. I knew the cabin was right beside the stream. I must have followed for a couple of miles. I was way out in those woods. I still felt dizzy, lightheaded, and a little nauseated. Finally, I see in the cabin. This whole time I felt something or someone with me. When I saw the cabin, I began to walk very fast towards it. I felt like all of my disorientation went away as soon as I walked in the cabin door. My brother's fiancée says, "Where the hell have you been? We were beginning to get worried about you. We had a really bad storm here with lightning half the day." I told her where I was. It was beautiful and sunny. I went to get cleaned up. Then I went upstairs and put on my PJs, and it was getting dark by this time. I opened the window, sat on the roof, and smoked a cigarette. I then went to sit down and brush my hair out at the vanity. I heard this huge thud like someone threw a brick on the roof by my bedroom window. I ran to see what caused the noise. While looking out that attic window, I saw a red hairy something. It was no more than 4 feet from me. Its back was turned so I could only see its back. I could see through the hair on its arms. It was white-looking skin underneath. I didn't notice a cone-shaped head. I couldn't really see a neck from the back, but its hair was like a thick lion's mane from around the shoulders going into like a V. Let's say it was about 6 to 7 feet tall. It was slouched over, facing away from me. It had hair on the back of its hands. I didn't see palms. I thought demon. What the hell is this thing? I took both hands to rub my eyes because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. When I removed my hands, it was gone. It had disappeared, so I sat in the window still smoking a cigarette. That really shook me up. The next thing I hear, 2 people outside talking. I strained my eyes, I strained my ears to hear verbal speech. What was she doing way out there in the woods? I heard the other voice say. My sister visited. She was picking berries and flowers. She wasn't doing anything wrong. The other voice said, "Why do you let her come back?" My brother said, "I want her to know where she was going." I thought it was my brother talking to a visitor who had come to the cabin. I didn't hear a car pull up, though it's like a 5-mile dirt road on a rural country road. I became suspicious, so I yelled, "Hey, Ron, who are you talking to?" I said it several times and I began to hear this kind of language I couldn't understand. I've heard people say it sounds like samurai chatter. I'm going to say Cherokee-sounding language. I then started yelling at the top of my voice, "Run, run!" My brother exited the house. He yells, "What the hell's going on?" I then knew it hadn't been my brother talking to someone, so I say, "Something just hit the roof of the house." It sounded like a brick. It was really loud. He runs into the cabin, gets a flashlight, shines it up at me sitting on the windowsill, looks all around, and sees nothing. He says, "I don't see anything." He sounded a little upset from me yelling like that. He comes back to the cabin. Then his cat comes through the window. I'm petting the cat while lying on my bed. Ron comes up and yells at me for having the cat in the house. I told him it came in by itself. He made me put the cat back outside on the roof. I still leave the window open enough so a breeze can still come through. I began to hear the mind speak in my head asking me if my brother had a gun. I told it he had many big enough to blow a hole in you the size of a bowling ball. It questioned the word bowling ball, so I used my hands to show the size. I felt like something or someone was in that room with me. I then turned the light out and went to bed. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. with something literally drumming at the end of my bed. I opened my eyes. I was afraid at first, but then upset for getting woke up. I yelled at whoever was doing it. I could not see anyone or anything. Then it did some more drumming. I told it to stop, it would wake everybody up in the cabin. I put my finger to my mouth like a gesture to be quiet. I think I made it mad, so I apologized to whatever it was and asked it to please not hurt me. I then said a prayer for protection. I know it seems crazy, but I swear to you this happened. I've heard Native people say that they, Bigfoot, can bond with you, and that you will always communicate with them. I'm in Texas now. I went back to Pennsylvania in 2016 to have neck surgery. I decided to go see my brother. He has his own place now, about 7 miles from that cabin. I was there by myself the second day, and I felt this overwhelming feeling of fear. I can't describe how I was shaking inside. I heard a loud thud outside on the porch. I knew right away that it was my Bigfoot friend. I turned all the inside lights out, but a few, and turned the porch lights on. My brother arrived 40 minutes later. The overwhelming fear I had felt went away right away. I went to bed on the pull-out sofa sleeper. As soon as I turned the lights out and got into bed, 5 minutes later, the whole metal frame of the bed bent down at the end, and I slid out. I pulled the mattress off and slept by the pellet stove on the floor. I began to hear my mind speak asking me about my neck. I believe that Bigfoot are interdimensional beings and have a language. I believe that they can cloak somehow, where they can be right in front of you and you can't see them. I believe they change their frequency somehow to do this. I have a story about the not deer from 2 summers ago. I lived deep in the Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee at the time, unlike the foothills I'm in now. I was wandering in the woods, probably 2/3 of a mile from my house at that point, as one does when they live 2 miles down a twisting dirt road with the nearest town, and therefore things to do 30 minutes away when I heard brush moving. I knew it was probably a harmless animal, a possum or a deer, maybe a particularly destructive rabbit, and I turned to look. It was a deer. It was about 30 feet away from me, staring. Wild deer don't stare at random people to begin with. They just ran away. This doe was breathing hard and making a low rumbling sound. I didn't really know what to do, and I hadn't really thought about the dangers of going near wild animals, even if they are harmless deer, so I went towards her. I swear to God, this thing's eyes blanked out, and it took a couple jerking steps forward, moving really strangely. And I flinched, and then she ran off to the side while staring at me until she was about 50 feet away. It was deeply unsettling in a way that I can't explain, and I know that that thing was not quite a deer. I sprinted all the way home. I would say that the joints went the wrong way. The bends were not where the bends go, and the shape of the face and head was wrong, more in the shape of a dog. It was just very odd looking, and the way it reacted to me was disturbing. I started to walk away, but the doe followed me for about 2 miles on the trail. It stayed at a distance of about 50 feet. After about 45 minutes of this, she suddenly disappeared. I have family that still live in the mountains, and they have described a variety of strange things. But the not deer is one phenomenon that they don't like to discuss. The wind was razor sharp against my face, a constant reminder of just how unforgiving Alaska could be. I'd spent the last decade up here in the wilderness, but this wasn't just another hunting or fishing trip. No, this was something different. I was on my way to meet Henry Kessler, an old trapper who, for years, had claimed to know the real truth about the disappearances in the remote stretches of Alaska. And not just Alaska. He said he knew what was happening all across the United States. Kessler was a grizzled legend in these parts, known for his hunting skills and survival instincts. And he had a reputation for being more than a little paranoid. But the stories he'd shared with people, they had a way of sticking with you. My name's Tom Larson, and I'd been investigating cryptids and strange occurrences for most of my life. It was a hobby I'd picked up after losing a friend to an accidental disappearance during a camping trip years ago. After that, the stories of people vanishing into thin air, of shadowy creatures lurking in the trees, had become personal. And when I heard that Kessler was finally willing to talk, I packed my gear and set off for the remote cabin where he'd lived alone for years. I arrived at Kessler's place just as the sun was dipping below the mountains, casting the whole landscape in a bruised, purple hue. Kessler's cabin was rugged, with patches on the roof and hand-cut logs reinforcing the walls. It looked like it had been standing for centuries, and maybe it had been, considering how isolated it was. Kessler himself was waiting for me on the porch, sitting in a weathered old rocker, a shotgun laid across his lap. His hair was white and thin, and his face looked like it had seen more than any one person should. He nodded at me as I approached. "Tom," he grumbled in a voice like gravel. "You're here to hear the truth. But once you hear it, there's no going back." I gave him a solemn nod. "That's why I'm here, Henry." He stood up, motioned for me to follow him inside. The interior of his cabin was simple. Firewood stacked in one corner, jars of preserved food lining the shelves, and a wood stove that crackled with a comforting heat. But it was the walls that caught my attention. They were covered in maps, newspaper clippings, and photos, some yellowed with age. The missing persons flyers were the most unsettling, faces of people who had simply vanished, some with dates and red circles drawn around specific locations. Kessler noticed me looking. "People don't go missing for no reason," he said, voice low. "And it's not just Alaska, Tom. It's the whole damn country. People disappear, and no one bothers to connect the dots." I took a seat, trying to ignore the chill crawling up my spine. "What do you mean?" He handed me an old map, and I noticed red XS scattered across various points in the S. Remote parks, stretches of mountains, dense forests. Each X had a name and a date scrawled beside it. "These aren't just random disappearances," Kessler said. "The government knows about them. They know what's out there. They just don't want folks like you and me finding out." I studied the map, recognizing some of the names and dates. "So what's causing this? What's out there, Henry?" Kessler leaned forward, his eyes darkening. "They're creatures, Tom. Some call them cryptids, some call them demons. Doesn't much matter what you call them. They're not from here, and they sure as hell don't play by our rules." He began to tell me about his own encounters, starting with the creature that haunted his land. He called it the Gray One. It was an enormous, wolf-like creature that moved on two legs and had eyes that glowed an unnatural yellow. He'd seen it only twice in his life, once when he first moved to this land, and again just a month ago. It's fast, smarter than anything I've ever seen, and it likes to stalk. Likes to let you know it's there before it disappears. "Sometimes I think it just enjoys the fear," he said, his voice trembling just a bit. "And it's not just the Gray One," he continued. "I've heard from trappers up north, folks who've been here long enough to understand that the land keeps secrets. They've seen things out there in the woods. Massive creatures covered in fur, humanoid but wrong. And down south, near the swamps, there's creatures that look like reptiles, but they walk like men. People go into those woods and never come back." I could feel my heart pounding as he talked, but he hadn't even gotten to the worst of it. "About 10 years ago, I saw something near Denali," Kessler said, his face going pale. "It was like a person, but it was stretched out thin. No face, just skin pulled tight over bone. It didn't walk, it glided. And when it saw me, it smiled. Not with a mouth. Its whole damn body seemed to twist into this grin. I ran, but I could feel it watching me the whole way back to the cabin. I tried to process what he was saying, but it sounded impossible, like something out of a nightmare. Have you told anyone else about this? I asked. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Who'd believe me? The government knows, Tom. Hell, they know more than you'd think. I've seen helicopters hovering over certain areas at night, watched as men in hazmat suits went into caves and came out looking like they'd seen hell itself. But they don't report it. They tell the media it's training exercises or weather studies. Bullshit. Kessler stood up and went to a cupboard, pulling out a stack of files, all bound together with a frayed leather strap. He handed them to me. These are the records I've kept, he said. Sightings, dates, patterns I've noticed. It's all there. I took the files, feeling their weight in my hands. And what about the disappearances? Why would they hide this from people? Kessler's face grew darker. You see, Tom, these creatures, they're not just random predators. They're after something. Some believe it's souls, some think it's power, others think they're just hungry. But the government, they'd rather keep it quiet. Imagine the panic if people knew there were things out here that defy everything we know. I spent hours listening to Kessler that night, his stories growing darker, the shadows in the room lengthening as the fire dwindled. He told me about the Wendigo in Montana, the Mothman sightings in the Midwest, strange lights over the forests in Oregon, and creatures in the Louisiana swamps that could mimic human voices. By the time he finished, the first light of dawn was peeking over the mountains. As I left, Kessler grabbed my shoulder. Be careful, Tom. Once you know about them, they know about you. Those words haunted me as I made my way back to civilization. I pored over Kessler's files for months, comparing them to other reports, cross-referencing with missing person records. The connections were there, hiding in plain sight. But the most disturbing part was that I started noticing things. A pair of eyes in the woods where there should have been none, shadows that moved when I wasn't looking, strange sounds in the night. Then, one evening, I found a note slipped under my door. In shaky handwriting, it simply read, "You know too much." I haven't heard from Kessler since that night. I tried visiting his cabin, but it was empty, abandoned. No one in town knew where he'd gone, but I'll keep looking. Because now I know the truth. The creatures are real, they're watching us, and anyone who learns too much is bound to disappear. The only question is, when will it be my turn? My boyfriend and I were camping in the woods last summer. It was about midnight, and we were still round the campfire talking and drinking. Earlier that day, we had seen a car with people drive past our camp, so we knew there were others in the close vicinity. Out of nowhere, we suddenly heard this gut-wrenching groaning coupled with crying and screams. A man's sobbing got louder and would fade away until we heard crying again, thumping on the ground and all kinds of weird noises. I have never heard anything like it, and this went on for about 5 minutes. I was naturally shitting myself, and because we're wild camping, the campsite's owners were about 1 kilometer in a farmhouse. We grabbed a knife and pretty much ran to the car and locked the doors. We texted the owners from the car, and they came up to the site. Turns out the group that had driven past us come up every year for a spiritual healing retreat. The guy we heard screaming and crying was getting cleansed. I figured I would submit my weird experience that I had several years ago. My wife, kids, and I were living in government housing and had just moved into a larger apartment across the road from where we were living. We upgraded from a 2 to 3 bedroom apartment. I would like to note that the housing where I am from is actually really nicely kept up and is more of an older folks community rather than a slum that housing is notorious for. We loved living there. This was in Chaffee, Missouri, which is in southeast Missouri in northern Scott County. We moved in the week of Christmas 2020 or 2021. I can't remember exactly because those years get me confused because we had so much going on, and we only lived there about 18 months before getting a house. So one night the kids were asleep and me and the wife were in bed. She was asleep and I was playing on my phone. The bed was situated so that I could see into the hall from the bed. The end of the bed was across from the door. Note, this was around 1:30 a.m. As I played on my phone, I started to see a bright glowing light coming from down the hall. I told my wife I was going to check it out as I thought maybe it was my computer that was in the living room. I got up, went down the hall, looked around, and didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. I went to the bathroom and then got back in bed. In total, this took maybe 2 minutes. The apartment was small, and you could see everything in just a minute or so. When I got back in bed, I got back on my phone, and that's when I noticed the time. It was 2:15 a.m. I had been gone for 45 minutes. My wife was fast asleep and snoring. I woke her up and asked her how long I had been gone. She didn't know and was still half asleep. Looking back at this situation, I still cannot explain how I was gone for such a long time without, as I remember the event clearly, and there were no gaps from the time I got up, looked around, went to the bathroom, and got back in bed. This incident occurred along the Wise River in Montana. The actual address is 61720 Montana Highway 43, Wise River, Montana 59762. I lived alone, and in this remote location, we don't have cable, so the only option is satellite TV. It was a humid summer night in July 2015 at around 11:30 p.m., and the TV was acting up, so I needed to go out and readjust the satellite like usual. I took a flashlight and a gun with me. When I went outside, it was unusually quiet. I also purchased an R due to other sightings I've had, but they weren't credible enough to chalk it up as a dogman. It was so silent, it was unnerving. I brushed the thought off and went to the dish, which is in the corner of my yard. I went to work, making sure all the wires were all right and pointing it to a different angle. Suddenly I heard a small snap of a stick to my left and turned the flashlight in the direction, and I saw a creature standing there. I got a good look at it for what seemed like an eternity, but was for only about 10 seconds. I slowly backed off and ran back to the house and locked all the doors and windows. The creature was unlike anything I had ever seen before. When I shone the light on it, the first thing I saw was the head. It has cropped ears that point upwards. Its snout was narrower than a bear's and longer, and I could make out large teeth protruding from the jaw. Its eyes were a deep red shade that seemed to reflect off the light I was pointing at it. The body was muscular and huge. It had long arms that appeared to be longer than its legs, broad shoulders that tapered into a skinnier waist. It was slightly crouched over when I saw it, with one hand wrapped around a small tree. I could make out the legs, which looked similar to a dog's legs. They had obvious hocks. Even with the crouched position, it was about my height, which is 6 feet. Standing up to full height, this creature could easily be 7.5 feet tall. The fur was black and thicker around the neck and chest, and the bottom half significantly less so. I don't know if it was aggressive or not. What I know is I had a feeling of dread, unlike anything I've ever experienced. Was it just observing me or stalking me? For a creature this large, it was deceivingly silent. It got within 15 yards of me without me noticing. All I knew was I needed to get out of there and not find out. I don't live on the property anymore, but after the event, I never had another face-to-face encounter. But I would hear sounds in the woods I couldn't explain. They would start off relatively quiet, and work their way up to furious howls or screams, then back down to quiet again. I don't know if this was the same thing because it could be local wildlife. The dry desert air clawed at my throat, and the sheer vastness of the Mojave stretched endlessly on either side of the cracked road. My name's Cole Danner, 38 years old, former Army scout turned freelance tracker, and for the past 3 weeks, a man on the edge of losing his damn mind. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked rough. 3 days of stubble, sunburned skin, and eyes that hadn't seen restful sleep in weeks. I wasn't coming to warn them out of goodwill. I was coming to survive. When I pulled into the dusty lot of the ranger station, the place looked deserted, save for an old Jeep parked crookedly near the entrance. I slid out of the truck, adjusting the Glock strapped to my thigh. Hello, I called, my voice cracking against the oppressive silence. A faint sound of voices carried from inside, and I headed for the door. I wasn't here to be polite. I was here because something was out there. Something wrong. And they needed to hear me out, whether they wanted to or not. The door creaked open, and I found two people inside. A tall, wiry man in his late 40s wearing the classic park ranger uniform, his name tag reading J. Garrett, and a younger woman with braided hair and a clipboard. She looked up from her paperwork with an eyebrow arched high. "Can we help you?" she asked, her tone equal parts irritation and curiosity. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Something's out in the basin. It's not an animal, and it's not human either." Garrett exchanged a glance with the woman, his jaw tightening. "If this is some joke." "It's not a joke." My voice was cold and sharp. "People are dead. The body count is climbing. Whatever's out there, it's hunting, and it's only a matter of time before it turns its attention here." The woman, who introduced herself as Ranger Elena Vega, set the clipboard down and stepped forward. "Start from the beginning," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly, but there was a flicker of concern behind her skepticism. I leaned against the counter, keeping my voice low but steady. 3 weeks ago, I was hired by a private research firm to track a missing team. 2 scientists. They'd gone into the Mojave Basin to study a sinkhole. Something about seismic activity and strange energy readings. They never came back. Garrett folded his arms, his expression hardening. "And this has what to do with us?" I ignored his tone and pushed on. "I found their campsite. What was left of it anyway. Their equipment was scattered, their notes burned, and there was blood. Too much blood for either of them to be alive. Then I found the tracks." "Tracks?" Vega pressed, her voice softer now, but there was an edge of disbelief. I nodded, my throat tightening at the memory. "Massive. Not like anything I've ever seen. 5 clawed toes, but the way they were spaced ... it wasn't walking. It was crawling, stalking, like it was moving low to the ground. I've hunted apex predators all my life. Mountain lions, bears, wolves, you name it. But this was different. And then the noises started." Garrett's brow furrowed. "Noises?" "A scream," I said, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Not human, not animal. Like metal grinding against metal, but alive somehow. I barely made it out of the basin alive. Whatever it is, it's not natural, and it's not going to stay out there forever. You've got people out here who don't stand a chance." The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the distant groan of the desert wind. Vega glanced at Garrett, her professionalism cracking just slightly. "What do you think, John?" Garrett sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I think this guy's either telling the truth, or he's lost his mind. Either way, we've got campers and hikers scattered across the park. If he's even half right." I took a step closer, my voice hard. "I'm right. And if you don't want to end up like the scientists, you'll listen to me. This thing, it's smart, it's fast, and it's hungry." The tension in the room was suffocating. Garrett finally nodded, but his eyes were cautious. "All right, Danner, you've got our attention. Now what?" I glanced out the window at the barren desert beyond, the sun dipping low on the horizon. The shadows were already stretching longer than they should have. "Now," I said, my voice grim, "we find it before it finds us." Garrett wasn't much of a believer, and I didn't have time to convince him. The desert didn't care if we believed in monsters. It only cared about which of us would bleed first. While Vega stayed skeptical, I could tell the seed of doubt had taken root in her mind. She stood by the radio, trying to get word to the other rangers. Garrett was pacing, muttering about tourists and liability. "Look, Danner," Garrett finally said, stopping mid-stride. "If there's really something out there, I need more than a story about tracks and screams. What exactly are we dealing with here?" I stared at him, the weight of 3 weeks of terror settling behind my eyes. "I don't know what it is, but it's not a bear. It's not some freak cougar. Whatever left those tracks is big. Bigger than anything you're prepared for. And it doesn't just kill, it takes its time." Viga turned from the radio, her face pale. I can't get anyone. The line's dead. My stomach twisted. Of course it is, I muttered. That's how it starts. First the radio goes, then the rest of your equipment starts failing. You think it's a coincidence, it's not. Garrett narrowed his eyes. What the hell are you saying? It's, what, interfering with our comms? I nodded slowly. I don't think it's just physical. Whatever this thing is, it messes with everything. Tech, animals, people. I didn't tell them about the voices I'd heard out in the desert. Whispers that sounded like the dead, calling my name. They weren't ready to hear that yet. Viga stepped closer, her voice firm. All right, let's assume for a second you're not crazy. Where do we start? We're not exactly armed for some creature out of a nightmare. I tapped the side of my Glock, the familiar weight grounding me. I've got enough firepower in the truck to hold it off, if we're lucky. But we need to find the campers first. They don't have a chance out there if this thing's hunting. Garrett huffed, grabbing his ranger hat from the counter. Fine. We've got about a dozen groups scattered across the park, but most of them are concentrated near the basin. Closest site's about 5 miles west. My gut twisted at the mention of the basin. Then we head there first, but we move fast. Once the sun goes down, it's over. The three of us piled into the station's Jeep, the engine coughing to life as Garrett took the wheel. The drive was tense, the only sound the crunch of gravel under the tires. Viga rode shotgun, her hand resting uneasily on a flare gun strapped to her hip. I sat in the back, my rifle slung across my lap. As we approached the first campsite, my unease deepened. The tents were still there, half collapsed under the weight of the wind, but there were no signs of life. No laughter. No movement. The fire pit was cold, the ash scattered across the ground. Garrett pulled the Jeep to a stop, his jaw tightening. This doesn't feel right. No kidding, I muttered, stepping out of the vehicle. I kept my rifle raised, scanning the perimeter. The wind carried a faint, metallic tang, like blood left to bake under the sun. Hello, Viga called, her voice breaking the stillness. Anyone here? The silence was oppressive. Then, from the edge of the clearing, a low rustling sound. My finger tightened on the trigger. Stay close, I hissed, moving toward the noise. Garrett followed, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. As we approached the source of the sound, I spotted something glinting in the dirt. A watch. The strap was torn, and the face was cracked, but there was no mistaking the blood smeared across it. Viga knelt down, picking it up carefully. This isn't good, she whispered. Before I could respond, the rustling grew louder, followed by a sound that made my blood run cold. A growl, deep and unnatural. It echoed through the trees, vibrating in my chest. What the hell was that? Garrett's voice cracked, his flashlight shaking slightly. I turned slowly, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. It's here. The growl grew louder, closer, and then the tree line erupted. Something massive moved through the shadows, too fast to see clearly, but large enough to knock over a sapling like it was nothing. Garrett stumbled back, swearing under his breath. Fall back, I barked, raising my rifle. The creature stopped just outside the light, its shape obscured by the thick shadows. But I could feel its eyes on me. Cold, intelligent, and hungry. Viga fumbled for the flare gun at her hip, her breaths coming quick and shallow. What is it? What do we do? Stay calm, I said, though my heart was pounding in my ears. It's testing us, trying to see how close it can get. Garrett cursed, stumbling toward the Jeep. This is insane. We need to get out of here. Not yet, I snapped. If we run now, it'll pick us off one by one. We stand our ground. The creature shifted in the shadows, its growl rising to a chilling scream that sent every instinct in my body screaming for me to run. I leveled the rifle at the dark shape, my finger hovering over the trigger. You wanted proof, I said through gritted teeth. There it is. The scream cut through the desert air, sharp and metallic, like a blade being dragged across steel. It wasn't natural. Nothing about it was, and it rattled me to my core. My rifle was steady, but my hands were cold, every muscle in my body locked. The creature lurked just beyond the tree line, its movements slow, deliberate. It wanted us to feel its presence, to know we were prey. "Danner, what are we dealing with here?" Viga's voice was tight, her knuckles white around the flare gun. I didn't answer right away. How could I? I didn't know what it was. Only what it could do. My voice came out low, controlled. "It's smart. It's waiting for one of us to make a mistake. Don't give it the chance." Garrett wasn't listening. He was already backing toward the jeep, the flashlight beam darting erratically through the shadows. "This is insane," he muttered, his voice rising with panic. "We can't fight that thing. We need to leave. Now." "Garrett, stop," I barked, but it was too late. His foot slipped on loose gravel, and the flashlight tumbled from his hand. It hit the ground with a dull clatter, the beam spinning wildly. The creature moved. It was fast. Too fast. A blur of darkness exploded from the trees, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The thing was massive, its body low to the ground like a predator in full sprint. Its skin shimmered in the moonlight, slick and almost metallic, and its limbs moved with a terrible, unnatural grace. But it was the eyes that froze me. Glowing, burning embers of orange locked onto Garrett as he scrambled backward. "Get down," I shouted, firing off a shot. The crack of the rifle echoed through the clearing, and the creature veered sharply, retreating into the shadows with an ear-splitting shriek. Garrett collapsed against the jeep, his chest heaving. "What the hell was that?" he gasped, his face pale and slick with sweat. "That's what I've been trying to warn you about," I snapped, keeping the rifle trained on the tree line. "Now do you believe me?" Viga was frozen, her eyes wide and unblinking. It didn't even flinch," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You shot it, and it didn't flinch." I didn't have the heart to tell her I wasn't sure if I'd even hit it. The thing was too fast, too unpredictable. "We need to move," I said, my voice hard. "It's testing us." That wasn't an attack, it was a warning. "A warning?" Garrett spat, his voice shaking with anger. "That thing tried to kill me. It could have if it wanted to," I countered. "But it didn't. It's playing with us, Garrett. Trying to see how scared we'll get before it makes its move." Viga looked at me, her face pale. "So what do we do? We can't just sit here and wait for it to come back." "We need to find the campers," I said, glancing toward the abandoned tents. "If they're still alive, they're sitting ducks out here. And if they're not," Garrett's voice was bitter, his fear turning to anger. "What then? We risk our necks for bodies." I stepped closer, my jaw tightening. "We don't leave anyone behind. Not if we can help it." Garrett opened his mouth to argue, but Viga cut him off. "He's right. We can't just run. We're rangers. It's our job to protect people, even from whatever that is." Garrett swore under his breath, but didn't argue further. He retrieved the flashlight from the ground, the beam unsteady in his trembling hands. "Fine, let's move. But if that thing comes back, I'm not sticking around to die." We moved quickly, staying close together as we searched the campsite. The tents were empty, the fire pit long cold. A trail of scattered belongings led deeper into the woods. Footprints, torn fabric, a crushed water bottle. The campers had run, and from the looks of it, they hadn't made it far. "Over here," Viga called, crouching near the edge of the clearing. She held up a torn backpack, the straps shredded and stained with something dark. Blood. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to focus. "The tracks are fresh," I said, pointing to the ground. "They were here recently. If we're lucky, they're still alive." "Lucky," Garrett muttered. "Right." We followed the trail in silence, the tension thick enough to choke on. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the usual sounds of insects and birds replaced by an oppressive stillness. Every crack of a twig underfoot made my pulse jump. Every shadow seemed to move in the corner of my eye. Then we heard it. A faint, muffled cry. "Did you hear that?" Viga whispered, her eyes wide. I nodded, motioning for them to stay quiet. The sound came again, closer this time. A voice, weak and trembling. "Help, please." My grip on the rifle tightened as we moved toward the sound. It led us to a shallow ravine, the earth sloping sharply downward. At the bottom, a man lay crumpled against a boulder, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Stay back," I warned, scanning the shadows. Viga ignored me, scrambling down the slope to reach him. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We're here to help." The man looked up, his face pale and streaked with dirt. "It's still here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's watching us." I turned sharply, my rifle sweeping the tree line. The shadows seemed deeper now, darker, as if they were alive. The man's words sent a chill down my spine, because he was right. It was still here, and it was watching. The man's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I scanned the tree line, my finger hovering over the trigger, but the shadows remained still. Too still. That uneasy quiet was back, pressing against my skull like a warning siren. Viga knelt by the injured camper, her voice low and soothing, while Garrett stood frozen at the edge of the ravine, his flashlight darting nervously. "Can you walk?" Viga asked the man, checking the crude splint tied to his leg. He winced and shook his head. "No," he rasped. It broke my leg. Tossed me like a rag doll. My friends, I don't know if they made it. I ran. Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Don't talk. Just breathe. We'll get you out of here." But deep down, I wasn't sure we'd make it out ourselves. Whatever this thing was, it was toying with us. And if the stories I'd pieced together were true, its games always ended the same way. With bodies. Garrett edged closer, his flashlight beam slicing through the dark. "This is suicide," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "We're sitting ducks out here." "Then keep your eyes up," I snapped, not taking my gaze off the forest. "You want to live? Focus." Something moved in the shadows, just a flicker of motion, but it was enough. My heart leapt into my throat as I raised the rifle. "Did you see that?" "See what?" Vega asked, glancing over her shoulder. I didn't answer. The thing had vanished as quickly as it had appeared, but I could feel it. An oppressive weight, like the air itself was holding its breath. It was close. Too close. "Vega, get him up," I said, my voice low and urgent. "We're not safe here." She hesitated, glancing at the man's mangled leg. "He can't walk. We'll have to carry him." "Then carry him," I growled, my patience wearing thin. "We don't have time to argue." Garrett crouched down, reluctantly helping Vega lift the man. His protests were weak, his face pale and slick with sweat. I covered them as they scrambled up the slope, every nerve in my body screaming that we were being watched. The injured camper whimpered as they loaded him into the back of the Jeep, and I jumped into the passenger seat, my rifle trained on the tree line. "Move," I barked at Garrett, who slid behind the wheel with trembling hands. The Jeep roared to life, the engine echoing through the forest as we sped away from the ravine. For a moment, I thought we'd made it. But then the screaming started. It wasn't the same metallic shriek as before. This was different. Human. "Stop the car," Vega shouted, twisting in her seat. Garrett slammed on the brakes, the Jeep skidding to a halt. "What the hell are you doing?" he yelled. "There's someone out there." Vega's face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. I heard it. Someone screaming. I gritted my teeth. "It's a trap," I said, my voice hard. "Don't fall for it." "How do you know?" she shot back, glaring at me. "Because I've heard it before," I said, the words bitter in my throat. "It mimics. It knows what scares us, what makes us hesitate. That's how it hunts." Garrett's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. "So what? We just leave them." "If you want to live, yes," I said coldly. The screaming came again, louder this time, and Vega's resolve cracked. "What if you're wrong?" she demanded. "What if someone's out there dying?" I closed my eyes, wrestling with the weight of her words. I didn't have time for doubt. Not now. "You want to save them," I said, opening my eyes and leveling her with a hard stare. "Fine. But we go in armed, and we move fast. No hesitation." Garrett groaned, slamming his fist against the wheel. "This is insane. We're going to die out here." Not if you stick to the plan, I said, climbing out of the jeep. The rifle felt heavier in my hands as I motioned for Vega to follow. Stay close. No heroics. We moved toward the source of the screams, the forest closing in around us like a living thing. The air was thick with tension, every shadow brimming with potential violence. Over there, Vega whispered, pointing to a cluster of trees. A figure stumbled into view, their movements jerky and unnatural. For a moment, I thought it was one of the campers. Then I saw the eyes. Dark, empty pits that stared straight through me. Jesus Christ, Garrett breathed, his voice trembling. The figure twitched, its head cocking to one side as if it were studying us. Then it opened its mouth, and the scream that came out wasn't human. Back to the jeep, I shouted, firing a warning shot. The bullet struck the ground near the figure, but it didn't flinch. It just kept coming, its limbs moving with a grotesque, bone-snapping rhythm. Vega grabbed my arm, her face pale. What is that? I don't know, I said, my voice tight with fear. But it's not alive. The thing broke into a sprint, its movements horrifyingly fast and uncoordinated. I fired again, the shot tearing through its shoulder, but it didn't stop. Run! I shouted, grabbing Vega and pulling her toward the jeep. Garrett was already inside, yelling at us to move faster. We barely made it, slamming the doors shut as the creature reached the vehicle. It clawed at the windows, its fingers leaving deep gouges in the glass. Garrett floored the gas, the jeep lurching forward as we sped away. The creature gave chase for a few terrifying seconds before vanishing into the shadows. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the labored breathing of the injured camper in the back seat. What the hell was that? Vega finally whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't answer. I didn't know. But whatever it wasn't done with us. The drive back to the ranger station felt like it lasted hours, even though the jeep's engine strained as Garrett pushed it to its limits. The headlights cut through the dense forest, casting flickering shadows that played cruel tricks on my eyes. Every branch seemed to move, every bush seemed to breathe. Vega sat silently beside me, her face pale, hands trembling as she clutched the injured camper's jacket. He had passed out, thankfully, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven gasps. Garrett, meanwhile, was muttering under his breath, his grip so tight on the wheel I thought he might snap it in two. You sure it's not following us? Garrett finally asked, his voice cracking. He didn't take his eyes off the road. Not sure of anything anymore, I replied flatly, gripping the rifle tighter. But if it is, we'll know soon enough. The ranger station's radio tower came into view just over the ridge, its red light blinking faintly against the black sky. Relief was fleeting. I didn't believe for a second that we were safe yet. Garrett screeched the jeep to a halt outside the station, and we scrambled out. I scanned the tree line, my stomach churning. The shadows were quiet again, but I knew better than to trust that. Get him inside, I ordered, gesturing to the camper. Vega nodded and struggled to help Garrett drag the man toward the station's door. My boots crunched over gravel as I moved to cover them, the rifle steady but my hands not. The station was a small, single-story building, designed more for paperwork and coffee breaks than survival. Its walls suddenly felt paper-thin as I shut the door behind us and locked it tight. We need to call this in, Garrett said, rushing to the radio. His voice was shaking, his eyes darting between us and the windows. We need backup. Hell, we need the National Guard. Vega set the camper on the tattered couch in the corner and reached for the first aid kit. I don't think anyone's coming, she muttered, not looking up. Garrett slammed his fist on the desk. What the hell are you talking about? We're not equipped for this. No one ever is, I said coldly, walking to the nearest window. My reflection stared back at me, hollow-eyed and gaunt, but I wasn't looking at myself. I was looking past it, into the black expanse of forest beyond. The radio crackled to life, pulling Garrett's attention. This is Ranger Station Echo calling state authorities, he said, his voice trembling. We have an injured civilian and an unknown, hostile entity in the woods. Requesting immediate assistance. Over. Static. He tried again, desperation creeping into his tone. Repeat. This is Echo. Do you copy? More static. Damn it. Garrett slammed the receiver down, his frustration boiling over. It's jammed or something. There's no signal. Of course there isn't, I said, my voice grim. You think whatever's out there doesn't know how to cut us off? It's smart, Garrett. Smarter than you think. He glared at me, his face flushed. And how do you know so much about it, huh? You've been acting like you knew this was coming all along. The words stung, but I couldn't deny there was truth to them. I turned away from the window, the weight of his accusation pressing down on me. Because I've seen it before, I admitted, my voice low. Not this exact thing, but close enough. My brother. He was a ranger too. Different park, different year. He went missing on patrol, just like those campers. They found his gear weeks later, scattered in a place it shouldn't have been. No blood, no body. Just his gear and what? Vega asked, her eyes wide. Tracks, I said, swallowing hard. But not human ones. The room fell silent. Even Garrett stopped pacing, his expression shifting from anger to unease. So what do we do? Vega asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. We wait, I said, though the words felt hollow. And we pray it doesn't figure out how to get in. The injured man groaned from the couch, his face slick with sweat. Vega knelt beside him, checking his pulse. He's getting worse, she said. We need to get him to a hospital. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Garrett snapped. We can't go back out there, not now. A sudden, sharp thud against the side of the station made all of us freeze. My heart hammered in my chest as I raised the rifle, motioning for them to stay quiet. Another thud, this time closer to the window. The glass rattled in its frame. Lights off, I hissed. Vega moved quickly, killing the overheads and plunging us into darkness. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the radio tower outside. We stood in silence, every breath loud in the suffocating quiet. Something scraped against the wall, a sound like nails on metal. It's testing us, I whispered, more to myself than to them. The scraping stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of our own breathing. Then the window shattered. Glass sprayed across the room as something dark and hulking forced its way inside. Garrett screamed, grabbing a chair to defend himself, but it was useless. The thing moved with terrifying speed, its limbs unnaturally long, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. I fired, the rifle's report deafening in the confined space. The creature recoiled, but only for a moment. Then it turned its empty, black gaze on me, and I knew we were out of time. The creature lunged, its distorted limbs stretching as if they were boneless, reaching for me. I fired again, aiming for center mass. The shot hit, and I saw it stagger, but not fall. Garrett grabbed a fire extinguisher from the corner, swinging it wildly in a panic, shouting something incoherent. Vega was screaming, her voice lost in the chaos. Get behind me, I yelled, my voice raw, shoving her toward the narrow hallway that led to the equipment room. Move. The thing was fast. Unnaturally fast. It scrambled across the room on all fours, its movements jerky and unnatural, its joints popping as if it were breaking and resetting with every motion. It knocked over the desk in its path, sending papers and the radio crashing to the floor. Garrett tried to swing at it again, but the creature's long, clawed hand caught the extinguisher mid-swing, tearing it from his grip and tossing it like a toy. Garrett, Vega screamed, grabbing him by the arm and dragging him backward. I squeezed off 2 more rounds, hitting the thing in its shoulder and chest, but it didn't slow down. It was like trying to stop a freight train with pebbles. My hands trembled as I reloaded, the rifle's bolt scraping loudly in the suffocating tension. Get to the back room, I barked, my voice shaking. Now. Garrett scrambled after Vega, his face pale, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I fired one last time, aiming for the thing's head. The bullet grazed its temple, black ichor splattering against the wall, but it barely seemed to notice. It let out a deep growl that reverberated through my chest, a sound that felt more like a warning than a cry of pain. I backed into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. The creature hit it a moment later, the wood splintering under its weight. We're not going to hold it off like this, Garrett shouted, his voice cracking. We don't need to hold it off, I snapped, my mind racing. We need to kill it. And how the hell are we supposed to do that? Vega was frantically rummaging through the equipment room, tossing aside old flares, ropes, and tools. There's gotta be something in here, she muttered, her voice frantic. Something we can use. The door to the hallway buckled under another heavy blow, the hinges groaning in protest. I braced it with my shoulder, trying to buy us time. Find something fast, I growled, gritting my teeth as the creature pounded against the door again. Then Vega's hands froze on a metal case. Wait. This might work. She hauled the case onto the table, flipping the latches open. Inside was an emergency flare gun, bright orange and slightly battered but still intact. Flares? Garrett asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. You think flares are going to stop that thing? Fire, Vega said, her tone resolute. Maybe it'll burn. Better than nothing, I said, grabbing the flare gun and shoving a cartridge into the chamber. The door gave way with a deafening crack, the creature bursting through in a spray of splinters. Its hollow eyes locked onto us, its jaw unhinging to let out another ear-splitting scream. Get down, I yelled, raising the flare gun. The flare hit its mark, embedding itself in the creature's chest. For a split second, nothing happened. Then it erupted in flames. The thing let out a screech that was almost human, writhing as fire engulfed its grotesque form. It staggered backward, flailing wildly, its claws raking deep gouges into the walls. The smell of burning flesh and something far fouler filled the air, making my stomach churn. It's working, Vega shouted, grabbing another flare and handing it to me. The creature slammed into the walls, its movements growing more erratic as the flames consumed it. Black ichor dripped from its body, sizzling as it hit the floor. It was still moving, but slower now, its strength faltering. I didn't wait for it to recover. I fired another flare, this one striking its head. The creature let out one final, horrific scream before collapsing into a smoldering heap. For a moment, none of us moved. The only sounds were our ragged breaths and the crackling of the flames. Is it dead? Garrett whispered, his voice trembling. I approached the charred remains cautiously, rifle raised. The creature's body twitched once, then went still. I nudged it with the barrel of the gun, but it didn't respond. Yeah, I said finally, my voice hoarse. It's dead. Vega slumped against the wall, her face pale and streaked with sweat. Garrett collapsed onto a nearby chair, burying his face in his hands. We need to get out of here, Vega said after a long silence. There's no telling if there's more of those things out there. She was right. The forest was still, but it didn't feel safe. It felt like the calm before the storm. We'll take the jeep, I said, reloading the rifle out of habit. Head to the nearest town and call for help. And what do we tell them? Garrett asked, his voice bitter. That we were attacked by some thing out of a nightmare. They'll think we're insane. Let them, I said, my jaw tightening. But at least they'll know. At least we'll have warned them. We gathered what we could and left the ranger station behind, the charred remains of the creature still smoldering on the floor. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Maybe it was just paranoia. Or maybe, just maybe, the thing in the station hadn't been the only one. I work as a ranger in one of the most haunted parks in America. When I graduated high school, I had few options, no money for college and no trades or skills. But the national forest nearby was desperate for park rangers and willing to hire immediately. Little did I know what I was getting into when I accepted the job. This all occurred a few years ago, and it made me seriously reconsider my line of work. The first week I was there, I came across a cabin that was not on any map. It nearly blended in with the pines and oaks around it, being made of logs stacked on each other with no windows and only a single door. I circled around it, disturbed by what appeared to be drops of blood emanating out from the door in a fan-like pattern. But I disregarded it, assuming this must be some hunter's cabin, and that the blood was likely from a deer. I opened the door and, to my horror, found the blood was not from a deer at all. There were multiple human corpses hanging from the ceiling, some cut down the middle with their guts taken out as if done by a hunter prepping a buck. The floor was covered in what appeared to be human skin, stretched out into a macabre carpet in front of the fireplace. On the table were cups made from human skulls, and the smell was so overwhelmingly rotten that I immediately turned to the side and vomited up my late lunch. As I composed myself and looked back inside, I realized with growing horror that the madman who had done all this was sitting in a chair with a shotgun in his mouth. His eyes followed me as I sprinted away, and I heard the gun go off a couple seconds later. I hid behind a tree 100 feet or so from the cabin, shakily raising my walkie-talkie to my trembling lips. "Hello," I said, my voice shaking badly. "I need immediate backup on the deer trail behind the graffitied rock on Windermere Lake. We have multiple fatalities by homicide, I repeat, multiple fatalities, and I believe we may also have an act of unaliving himself. We need police in the area as soon as possible." A voice came in over the radio. "Get out of there, Ranger," hissed a guttural voice. "Get out of there and never come back. That cabin is for the sinners, those who worship the dead stars, those who have offered their lives to the ancient ones." The walkie-talkie then stopped working and turned into pure static, but I heard the same voice approaching from behind me. I frantically reached into my pocket for my bare mace and folding knife. The bare mace seemed like such a pitiful tool as I held it in my hand and heard someone drawing closer, dragging their legs through the twigs and leaves on the autumn forest floor. Now I heard the same voice, but instead of coming through my walkie-talkie, it was coming from directly in front of me. "You are not one who sees the lights from the dying stars, or one who would trade your life for the knowledge of that light. So run, while you still have the chance." Behind the tree, I saw the man who had killed himself approaching. The entire top of his head was gone, though his jaw and lips were still intact. Blood poured from out of his nose and covered his eyes like red tears. It was impossible that he could still be alive, less likely walking and talking like he was. But he stood there, 10 feet away in his camo jacket and khakis, looking paler than a maggot writhing in the sunlight. As I watched him, shaking with horror and unintentionally dropping my walkie-talkie, he fell to the forest floor and ceased moving, turning back into a regular faceless corpse. My walkie-talkie started working normally again, and I immediately called the crime scene into the ranger station. They had SWAT and helicopters on the way within minutes, and I vacated the premises as fast as possible. And that was just my first week. Things got a lot weirder after that. His name was Ron Gutierrez. The head ranger, Antonio Brown, told me later in his office. A multiple felon, convicted as offender. Disappeared from parole a couple months ago. I think the feds put out a warrant for him, interstate evasion or something, but it didn't do any good. He was never suspected of murder, at least as far as the state troopers seemed to think, but clearly our old buddy Ron was up to a lot more than the police thought. There were parts of at least 4 bodies in that cabin you found. He shook his head in disgust, his large mustache and huge belly making him look like an agitated walrus as he did so. "This is going to be a media cluster F, I can tell you that right now. I seriously doubt 4 is the final number of his victim tally. That means the FBI will be arriving too, as is usual protocol with serial killer investigations. They're going to want to see if there were more victims from other states." "I just want to go home," I said, and it was true. I hadn't slept the night before, and I kept seeing the dead man's face, hovering before me in the dark. And I wondered about that voice, that horrible voice. Was it a delusion or stress? It had to be. "Listen, Cal," the head ranger said, putting his hand on my shoulder. "I feel for you, I really do. But we're understaffed, as you know. I can give you the rest of today off, but I need you back tomorrow. Don't let stuff like this ride you. Just forget it. Go have a beer or shoot some guns or whatever you do to blow off steam. But don't let that madman ruin your life too. He already ruined enough others." "Thanks, Antonio," I said, forming a feeble smile. My stomach hurt and my heart was racing, and I just wanted to go home and lay down. I had no idea at the time, but things were about to get much, much worse. I went home and turned off the lights and lay down in the dark. The sun was still out, but I had the thick curtains closed. My wife came home from work a couple hours later and found me staring at the ceiling. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded. "If I started going crazy," I asked her, "would you want to know?" She smiled, amused. Yeah, sure, she said. I'm hoping I'd be the first person you tell. Why? Is there something you want to tell me? Nope, I said, laughing a little. She always cheered me up. I fell asleep soon after, and awoke to a ringing telephone in the dark room by myself. Hello, I said, rising. Cal, this is Antonio, he said. The police are on their way. Now listen. I'm here with the FBI, and they found evidence. Well, they think our buddy Ron had an accomplice. Maybe more than one, I don't know. Are you okay? Hold on, I said, dropping the phone quickly. I got to my feet, a surge of adrenaline waking me fully as his words sunk into my consciousness. Stacy, I cried, moving from room to room. I got no reply. Are you here? Please answer me, now. The house stayed as silent as a corpse. As I got downstairs, I found the front door wide open, the light from the street lamps flooding inside. But my wife was nowhere to be found. She was gone. Part 2. I ran out the door as sirens and flashing lights covered the streets. Police swarmed the area with their guns drawn, telling me to put my hands up and walk forward slowly. They found no trace of the kidnappers or of my wife. Soon, Antonio showed up with 2 FBI agents standing to his side. They saw me, sitting there on the curb, my head hung low, my eyes wet. The agents gave away nothing behind their sunglasses, both in black suits with clean-shaven faces and short hair. The sheriff showed up and pulled them to the side. I saw him pointing at the house and talking faster and faster, his eyes a mixture of uncertainty and fear. Clouds the color of nicotine stains passed slowly overhead, and I felt my energy draining, my mind running low. I knew I might never see my wife alive again. I might never see her dead, for that matter. The woods in the area seemed endless and vast, and many people simply disappeared, never to be found. Their bodies likely lay at the bottom of lakes or deep down in the dirt of national parks, far off the trails where the eyes of tourists wouldn't roam. So what do you know? I asked them, raising my head as they approached. I dried my eyes, blinking fast, steeling myself and trying to raise my will. Well, Antonio said, we found multiple sets of fingerprints in the cabin. Only one belonged to the dead suspect, and the victims were eliminated, at least those with fingers left. However, when we checked the footage of the park to try to find evidence relating to the crimes, we saw you pulling out and being followed. My heart stopped in my chest. I hadn't known or suspected anything at the time. They might even have someone watching me right now. But why hadn't they taken me? Why hadn't they just killed me, or at least tried to? Why just take my wife? I thought I might find out sooner than I expected. As the situation cooled down, and my wife's trail got colder by the minute, I was taken aside by Sheriff Howls and Antonio Brown. They looked uncomfortable. Antonio massaged his walrus mustache repeatedly, a sign of anxiety I had seen before. The sheriff looked around the street, as if hoping to find my wife just randomly stumbling out of a nearby building, drunk and confused but certainly alive. Sheriff Howls was a skinny and unassuming man. His body showed signs of lifelong alcoholism. Burst capillaries ran along the length of tanned face, and his nose looked like a patchwork of red trails. But in his face, his dark eyes showed intelligence, and on his extremely skinny body, he proudly displayed his badge, the star looking dull and lifeless under the thick, dirty clouds that covered our town. I felt the first drops of rain hit me on the top of my head. They felt like tears, as if even the sky had started to cry to join me in my loss. Well, Sheriff Howls said, trying to form a smile. It failed miserably, and he went back to frowning and looking around at the houses, avoiding eye contact with me. We have some good news, Mr. Lorenzo. I looked at him expectantly. He cleared his throat. First, we have solid fingerprint evidence from the scene. We are almost positive the fingerprints collected nearby are not from any victims. We tried running them through state and federal databases, but he shook his head, sighing. No leads yet. Don't give up hope, though. These things take time. The car that followed you was reported stolen sometime last night. It might be a dead end, but if we can find video footage in the area, we might be able to connect the stolen car to the murders and kidnapping of your wife. We have state and federal police on that right now. Your neighbors didn't report seeing or hearing anything, At least not anyone we have interviewed yet. We're still going through, but as we get further from the house, it becomes less likely that anyone will have seen much more than a car, if that. Your neighbor across the street, however, has a doorbell camera installed, and we're currently reviewing that evidence. It's only a matter of time before we catch these scumbags, I'll tell you that. They've left far too much evidence behind. It doesn't look like a professional job. That means they'll probably make more mistakes along the way, and will find and use every single one to make sure your wife gets returned unharmed. I still didn't look at him, but stared blankly at the road ahead of me. The rain started falling harder. Antonio went to his car, grabbing an umbrella and standing beside me, shielding him and me from the dirty rain. It's only a matter of time, I said, until they kill my wife too. You realize that? Time is not a factor on our side. As she gets further away and the trail becomes colder, the chance of finding any part of her ever again rapidly drops to zero. You're right, Antonio said, moving his huge body closer to me as lightning and thunder started. Echoing booms spread across the street. Many of the agents and police went to their cars for umbrellas or went inside the house. Any trace evidence on the street or lawn would wash away to nothing after a few minutes of this. Most likely, it already had. Why do you think we're all here? We're doing everything we can to keep the trail hot. Do you have any ideas, Cal? Any ideas at all? Don't be afraid to tell us. Nothing is too outlandish. Hell, I'd call up a psychic if I actually thought it might help us find her. I thought maybe we could try using you as bait, Sheriff Cowell said. If they followed you once, perhaps they'll do it again. I nodded. That's a good idea, I said. It's worth a shot. But I think we need to go back to the park, where this all started. That's where we will find the answers. And as the police work wound its way forward through bureaucracy and uncertainty, we ultimately did go back to the park. Sheriff Cowles stayed at the site for a while, stating he couldn't leave just yet. I gave him my cell phone number and the number for the ranger station at the park and told him to call me if he figured out anything. He promised he would and shook my hand, the thin bones of his long fingers wrapping around my palm as I stared into his bleary eyes. He didn't stare back, but looked away quickly. Though this happened years ago, I still remember how he refused to look me in the face, and to this day, I wonder how much he really knew. Certainly, in hindsight, it was far more than he let on at the time. Antonio called up a few rangers, explaining the situation and asking them if they would help. They readily agreed, and he said he would pay them overtime for their help. Within half an hour, we had 5 rangers at the station, all armed with shotguns and rifles from the armory. We couldn't exactly close the whole park, which ranged over 200 square miles and included campgrounds and nature reserves. But the area near the cabin had been sealed off and manned by police. Antonio explained the situation as quickly as he could. The other rangers looked at me with eyes of sadness, and some tried to avoid looking at me altogether. I kept seeing my wife in my mind, her smiling face and beautiful green eyes, looking like polished circles of emerald. We will break into 2 groups, Antonio said, handing me a 20-gauge shotgun and a backpack. I found water and snacks as well as some boxes of buckshot and shotgun slugs inside. I'll go with Cal. Dean, you come with us as well. He motioned to a young ranger, extremely tall and skinny with strange tattoos of pyramids and eyes and half-animal gods all down his arms. He usually covered them up when at work. What are we actually expecting to find? Another ranger asked, an older woman named Allie. Bodies, lunatics. Are we looking for more cabins? The entire thing is somewhat fuzzy, I guess. And where are the police? Shouldn't we have police escorts as well? Look, the police did a scan of the area, Antonio said, frowning slightly at her. We shouldn't find anything dangerous. We're just looking for evidence. Anything dropped, any disturbed trails in the vicinity of the cabin that the police may have missed, drops of blood, dead or mutilated animals. I don't really know what we will find, if anything. I doubt it will be dangerous, though. Looking back on it now, a chill runs down my spine when I think about just how wrong he turned out to be. Night had started to come again too soon. We used bright LED flashlights on the trail, speaking little through the misery of the cold rain. All of us had ponchos on, but the wind began to pick up, blowing the rain sideways and into my face and clothes. I swore under my breath. What an absolutely horrible, miserable day. Dean stayed close by my side, talking sporadically. He tried to cheer me up, talking about jokes and the news and the stock market. I mostly grunted and nodded, feeling dissociated and unreal, like I was in a dream. Then his conversation took a bizarre turn. Have you ever seen, or heard, I guess, heard too, anything really weird in this park? Dean asked, looking sideways at me. He looked much younger in his uncertainty, like a teenager trying to ask for a dance with a pretty girl, but uncertain how to go about it. I sighed, realizing he would not leave me alone. Part of me also realized he had volunteered to come out here in the middle of the night solely to help me, and that he may even end up risking his life on this mission if things went sour. But I still felt a childish spitefulness about having to interact. Yes, I've heard some weird stuff, I said. I also saw a carpet made of human skin. I guess that qualifies as weird. It does, Dean nodded. But it's not like supernatural weird. I mean, have you ever seen a ghost or a demon or anything like that? I paused for a very long moment. Antonio walked in front of us, grunting and keeping his gun raised, the illumination from the flashlight attachment bouncing crazily off the trees and making the shadows of the branches look like arms, stretching out in the woods to grab whatever they could. I looked over at him. His face had a very serious expression on it, unusual for Dean, and he avoided eye contact. What is this about? I asked. Have you seen a ghost here? Is that what you're trying to tell me? Well, Dean said, looking away into the trees, shining his flashlight at nothing for good measure. I'm not sure. I definitely saw something strange during the night shift one time. I thought, at the time, maybe it was like, I don't know, a homeless guy on meth who was just really weird and crazy looking. But I was patrolling the trails for poachers and trespassers when someone just started screaming. I was nearly 5 miles away from the ranger station, in the middle of nowhere, and the trail itself was rarely traveled except by hunters. My first thought was that it was a fox or some injured animal. They can sound very human when they scream, you know. I nodded. But it followed me and kept following me as I went down the trail. I turned, trying to see what the hell it was. I called out, identifying myself as a ranger and telling them they were trespassing, that the trail was closed for the night and the police were on their way. It seemed like the person, or whatever they were, just kept screaming, as if they didn't need to breathe. I've never heard anything like it. They just didn't stop. It went on for minutes, and then suddenly cut out. But ahead of me on the trail, I saw something naked. It looked kinda like a person, but their body was skin and bones, and so pale that it almost glowed. I could see every bone, every rib. Its head was down, and it just stood there with this eerie smile on their face. No hair anywhere, no eyebrows, no pubic hair, no chest hair, not even a hair on their head. Now I guess they could just shave really well every day, but your eyebrows, I mean, I don't know. People are strange, I guess. And then it raised its head, and I saw the eyes were missing. Just cut out of its face. Black sockets seemed to stare at me, as if they could still see me. I don't see how. Blood trickled from the empty sockets, and its smile widened. Oh, Dean, it said to me, your mother says the water is fine. Come on in, Dean. She's waiting for you. My mother died by drowning in Lake Winnisockee when I was 10. No one really knows about it, because I don't talk about it. She hit her head on the side of the boat and fell out. My dad had been pulling donuts in the middle of the lake, trying to make me laugh, and my mom just lost her balance or something and, well, by the time they dragged her body out, she didn't look like my mom anymore. Blue lips and swollen skin, and the fishes had started to nip at her and tear her apart. Now how could this random guy in the middle of the woods with no eyes have known and be waiting for me? And after he said it, he ran towards me. I immediately reached for my bare mace, then realized it might not work so well on someone without eyes, though I guess if I got it in his mouth and nose he would still drop. But I turned to run, and a few seconds later I looked back, and he was gone. Dean shuddered. That was one of the worst experiences of my life. I checked my back every couple seconds on the way to the station, and I called on the walkie-talkie for help, but I just got static and screams back, And I swear, I was totally sober when it happened. I wasn't dreaming or anything. I hadn't even had a beer in over a week. It really happened, Cal. There's something in these woods, something strange and inhuman. I nodded, about to respond when we heard the first skittering of footsteps from behind us. I stopped, motioning to Dean. He whispered something to Antonio. I saw Antonio's sweaty face glancing back and forth, looking down the trail with wide eyes. Then I heard it again, the snapping of a twig, the slight rustling of brush. "Identify yourselves," I yelled. "We are park rangers, and this is a police investigation. You are currently trespassing in a restricted area. This area is closed until the state agency clears it for reopening. If you identify yourselves and leave the area immediately, you won't be in any trouble." I waited. Nothing happened at first. Then a soft, low chuckling started from the darkness. My shotgun had a flashlight attachment, and I shone the bright lead light in the direction of the laughter. From behind the bushes, I saw the flash of an inhuman hand. The fingers looked crooked and far too long, the skin blackened and covered with weeping sores. Then it withdrew into the brush, and more laughter started from all sides of the trail. "You are not at home, Rangers," a mocking voice said. "This is our home now. You are trespassing on holy ground. The penalty for that is death." Antonio raised his rifle, screaming at the voice. "Come on and try it, F-face," he yelled, his face flushed and his large body quivering with rage and fear. "You maniacs are due for a lesson in what happens to people who F with Rangers." The laughter grew louder, more intense, and figures started to come out of the shadows and bushes, stepping out from behind trees and appearing from the huge rocks standing all over the park. All had the same blackened skin and thin, long limbs. They looked like demons who had stepped out of hell, and perhaps they were. Without hesitation, I opened fire, and they ran forwards, hissing and shrieking, their naked, sickly bodies and fire-blackened skin approaching closer with every moment. Part 3. I saw the chest explode on the nearest figure, a tall, emaciated creature with bloody red eyes. The film of blood seemed about to overflow and fall down his face as tears, but it never did. The eyes of the others looked the same, and in the beams of the overly bright LED flashlights, they almost seemed to glow and shimmer. I could see the vague silhouette of pupils beneath the blood. Though this happened years ago, I still remember the way they looked. The superhuman speed of these abominations, the flakes that fell off their crisp, destroyed skin in the pale moonlight, and the much brighter lights of our flashlight beams. Their emaciated, scorched bodies moved in a blur, surrounding and rushing us. The gunshots broke the stillness of the woods, and everything seemed to devolve into chaos within seconds. In the moment, I felt a wave of calmness come over me. I could see us being surrounded, see the rounds taking down the first line of blackened creatures, but I felt at peace. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. I aimed the shotgun again and again at center mass, blowing apart their chests and stomachs with shotgun slugs, and none of them rose. Blue blood spurted from their wounds. It had the hue of a dark Arctic ocean, frozen and endless. The dark blue fluid soaked into their burnt skin as they lay on the ground, gasping and dying, clenching and unclenching their twisted fingers with endless, gurgling screams. But we were 5 against many, hopelessly outnumbered. Whatever these things were, they seemed to have no fear. They kept coming, running at us, and I had to reload. With practiced ease, my fingers yanked slugs from my bulging pockets, slamming them into the shotgun. Most of the other rangers had also run out of ammo. I saw a couple dozen blackened bodies laying across the trail and the forest, some of them dead, others dying or seizing, kicking their strangely long and crooked feet again and again, like a child throwing a tantrum. Soon they had started to reach us, and I saw them grab Antonio, heaving his massive body across the trail and throwing him to the ground. Others saw the opportunity and leapt towards him, their fangs gleaming in the artificial light. They began to bite at his face and neck. "Get away from him!" I screamed, slamming the last slug into the gun and running forwards. I began firing, but in my excitement the first shot went high and blew apart a tree, sending chunks of bark and splinters in every direction. The next one hit the creature that bent over Antonio's neck, entering the back of its head and continuing down towards the forest floor. The shot missed Antonio himself by only a foot or so, but it had to be done. I had no better angle to fire from at the time. The creature fell over Antonio, but another one bent over his chest, and I saw with horror that he had bitten a chunk from Antonio's shoulder and now sucked out the spurting blood, sighing in pleasure and grinning. It looked up at me for a moment, blood staining its teeth red, its liquid eyes emanating hatred and hunger towards me. I shot it in the neck, and the blue blood of its body mixed with the red of its feast, giving a technicolor hue to the life fluids that leaked out of its broken, dying body. I kicked the creatures off of Antonio. They felt surprisingly light, like lifting the body of a child. Though they were taller than any man in our group, their emaciated bodies didn't seem to have an ounce of fat, as if they had been starved for weeks, and then released to feed on whatever they found. The last ranger in our group, a new and very young-looking man by the name of Roger, ran past, shooting at something in the forest, hollering and laughing. I registered it for a moment, then a scream took me back to the present. Dean shrieked at me. "Behind you," I spun, finding 3 more of the creatures standing there, blue saliva foaming from their mouths. Their sharp teeth gnashed at the air, tasting the meat that stood in front of them before it had even entered their mouth. And they rushed at me at once. I fired 3 times and hit 2 of them in the head. The 3rd shot went high, and then the creature was on me, knocking me to the ground. I knew I had no more shells in my shotgun by this point, having fired all 6 rounds. I held onto the shotgun and tried to use it as a weapon. Turning it sideways, I used it like a club, forcing it against the creature's thin, long neck. Its head came down towards my face, snapping and breathing rotten fumes into my mouth. I tasted its saliva as it dripped down onto my lips, a taste like rancid meat and chemicals. I spat, pushing with all my strength, but it continued to get closer until its face, and its many sharp fangs, stood only a fraction of an inch from my own. We looked into each other's eyes like infatuated lovers. But I knew the only thing this creature loved in me was my flesh, which it would rip apart as I lay there, screaming and pleading for death. As my strength failed and the creature's face lunged forward, opening its maw wide, its head exploded, sending a waterfall of cerulean blood pouring down over my mouth and nose. I felt pieces of its skin stuck to mine, and soon I held only a lifeless corpse by the neck with my shotgun. Spitting and retching, I rolled to my side, wiping my eyes with my jacket sleeve. I looked up and saw Dean standing there, a black .30-06 Remington in his hands. He smiled at me and gave me his hand. "God damn," I said, spitting on the ground and nearly throwing up as I tasted the blood at the back of my throat. "I guess you could have waited longer, Dean." He shrugged. "They're gone," he said, showing me the bodies of a few dozen blackened monstrosities laying on the ground. "The rest of them fled into the woods. I doubt that's the last we will see of them, though. And I would have shot it sooner, but Allie had one on her back. Literally, it jumped on her like it wanted a piggyback ride. And it bit into her shoulder and sucked some of her blood. I took that one out in yours as quickly as I could." Then I remembered Antonio. "Where's Antonio?" I asked, goosebumps rising on my skin. "Is he?" "He's still alive," Dean said, his smile fading. He pointed to Antonio on the ground. Allie stood by his side, applying pressure to the gaping wound on his shoulder. I could see pieces of his bone through it. His right ear was gone, and he had blood pouring from a scalp wound. He breathed fast, raising and lowering his arms and calling out for his wife. Allie calmed him. "We're getting you help," she said. "You're going to be okay. It doesn't look like any major blood vessels got severed, thank God." "How the hell are we supposed to get him out of here?" I asked. I tried my walkie-talkie, remembering Dean's story about how his had failed at the critical moment when he needed help. But this time it worked. I heard the voice of a female ranger come through, and it sounded like an angel to me in that time of desperation. "Antonio Brown, the head ranger, is seriously injured," I said. "We need an immediate medical evac. We are on the Loggerhead Trail, right before it meets the Angel Trace Mountain Circuit." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry to tell you, but there is nowhere to land any sort of helicopter in that area," she said. "I think you already knew that, though. The best chance to get him out of there quickly is with an ATV with an attached trailer. But that's going to be a bumpy ride. Is he critically injured, do you think, or—" "Look, I'm not a doctor," I said. but he has blood all over him. He's missing an ear and a piece of his shoulder, and he has a massive scalp laceration. Ali doesn't seem to think he has any arteries severed, but she isn't exactly a doctor either. And what about everyone else? I've already called in the paramedics, they're on their way. Another ranger is setting up the ATV attachment with blankets for Antonio, so we can pull him out of there to safety. Are there any other injuries? I looked at Ali with her bleeding shoulder. I had a few scrapes and cuts on me, but considering the circumstances, I considered those nothing at all. Dean looked totally fine, as if he had just stepped out of the ranger station to go on a moonlit stroll. Then I looked around, lowering the walkie-talkie suddenly. "Where is the new guy?" I asked loudly. They all turned to me, even Antonio. We had 5 people. We had Roger, that young ranger, in the back. "Where the hell is he?" Dean shrugged. "Maybe he ran off when the fighting started," he asked helpfully. "I mean, he didn't exactly sign up for this. I don't think most people would want to start a new job like this, to be honest." "No," Ali said, frowning. "He was next to me when the attack started. I saw him shooting. He had a 12-gauge Mossberg. It was so loud every time he fired it, my ears were ringing. And then," she shook her head. "By the time that thing jumped on me, he wasn't here. Maybe he got dragged away. God, I hope not. I hope he just ran back to the station." "Calvin," the ranger asked on the other end of the walkie-talkie. "Did we lose you?" I raised it to my lips, hesitantly. "I'm not sure how to say this," I said, "but I think Roger may be gone. I don't even know if he is still alive. You should call the police and get some search helicopters going." I didn't add, however, that the chances of any helicopter finding him, alive or dead, were slim. If those creatures had dragged him off, we might find bones stripped of flesh, or maybe, more likely, nothing at all. "This was a total shitshow," I said, once we were back at the station. A Lifestar helicopter had taken Antonio and Ali to the hospital to be stitched up and given shots for rabies and infection. I didn't really know Roger, as he was always quiet and had just started a couple weeks ago, but I felt a sense of guilt for him as well. Dean came towards me, putting his hand on my shoulder. "We can't give up," he said. "Your wife may still be alive." I nodded, staring off through the window at the dark forest outside. "I'm going back," I said. "Tonight. I don't have time to waste. I'll take a different trail. If my wife is alive, then the way to find her is out there, I know it. I think it's at that cabin." "Aren't there police guarding the cabin?" he asked. I nodded. "So they say," I said bitterly. "I'm going." "I'll come with you," he said, looking determinedly at me. "Why in the world would you want to come with me? You realize I'll probably die, right?" He shrugged. "I'm not so sure of that," he said. "But maybe, we could all die tonight, I guess. I'm still coming though, and let's bring more guns this time." I nodded, smiling slightly. We went to the armory. I still had my 20-gauge shotgun and my backpack with slugs and shells inside. I also grabbed 2 pistols, a Ruger Super Red Hawk and a Smith & Wesson Model 500. Dean grabbed a Judge, a pistol that fires shotgun shells, and a .50 Action Express. We filled our packs with more ammo, strapping the pistols to our belts. It all felt extremely heavy to me, and I knew it would slow us down. But I didn't want to risk running out of bullets so fast this time. We also each grabbed a large Bowie knife, strapping the sheaths next to the pistols. I put a few bottles of water in my pack, giving a few to Dean, and threw in some peanut butter and crackers for good measure. I wasn't expecting to be out long after all. We set off, the night seeming darker than ever. Mostly, we walked in silence, listening to the chirping of bugs. My light illuminated an owl that flew down in the middle of the trail, looked at both of us with disdain, then flew off again. "You know, owls are omens in many cultures," Dean said. "Omens of what?" I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged. "Depends, I guess. In Asia, sometimes they signify good fortune and luck. But the Native Americans and others often thought of them as omens of death or bad luck." "Great," I said, frowning. "Well, I don't believe in that crap anyways. I make my own luck." He laughed. "That's a good mindset," he said. "If only it were true." We got to the cabin in good time. Other than the owl, we saw nothing on the way. The forest seemed silent and sleeping, or perhaps just watching, wondering what we would do next. I saw the windowless cabin ahead, standing aloof in the silent, dark night. It looked eerie, the door standing open, as if beckoning us inside. Splatters of dark, dried blood still showed on the threshold and the front of the door, contrasting heavily with the white wood in the lead light. "Isn't there supposed to be police protection?" I asked, confused. "I thought they had a cop out here or something." "That's what they told me," Dean said, frowning. He raised his gun, walking forward slowly. "This is the park ranger, Dean," identifying myself. He yelled loudly. "Do not shoot. I repeat, we work for the park. Please respond if you can hear me." The echoes faded into the trees, but I heard nothing. I walked side by side with Dean, then started sprinting forwards towards the open door. Something was wrong, and I knew it. I peered inside and saw the body of a police officer, crucified against the wall. Large nails were driven through his wrists, drops of fresh blood still falling quietly to the wooden floor below. His eyelids were missing, cut or bitten off, giving him a look of perpetual surprise and terror. He had been disemboweled, his intestines hanging down like the leaves of a weeping willow. And from behind us, I heard laughter. Turning around, I saw Roger, the new ranger, dressed in a black robe and surrounded by dozens of the thin, emaciated creatures. He smiled, his boyish blue eyes turning cold and insane as he showed all his teeth. my friends, you have come back," he said. "Thank you for that. My creatures need to feed, and your bodies will make delicious meals for them." Part 4. "Why are you doing this?" I asked him, stepping back and slowly flicking the safety off my shotgun with my pointer finger. "And where's Stacy?" Roger laughed. "Your wife is somewhere safe, I can assure you," he said, his face a mask of insanity and evil. "She is being transformed. She is becoming something more than human, greater than humanity ever imagined. With my help, she will live forever. Would you like to join her?" "I'd rather die," I said, raising my shotgun and pointing it at his head. He smiled. "If you kill me, your wife will die, I assure you," Roger said, pushing his blonde hair to the side. "She will die slowly, probably starving. She is in a place no one will ever find her. Only I know where she is being held. But it is your choice. Do we not all have free will?" The creatures around him stood as still as statues, each of their blood-red eyes focused directly on me. If I hadn't seen them move earlier, I might have thought they were simply grotesque Halloween decorations. They didn't even seem to breathe. And then I realized, perhaps they didn't. "What are these things?" I said, pointing to the blackened, emaciated bodies that surrounded him. "Some sort of black magic," he shrugged. "Black magic is just a word, my friend," he said. "There is no such thing as white or black magic. There is only power, and those with the will to change the world. As a great man once said, 'Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.'" I shook my head. "I have no idea what that means," I said. "Do what thou wilt," he said, his eyes blazing with intensity now. "Do what you will. When God created the universe in his infinite energy and power, he willed it to be. In the space of a moment, it came out of the void. I too have a will. We are made in his image after all. And my will has been honed and intensified until soon I will approach the power of the angels, and one day, even of God himself." "So what's your actual plan here?" I asked. "You want to create a race of monsters that goes around killing anyone they want at random. You want to kidnap innocent people and subject them to God knows what kind of horrors, all because of your will." "Yes, exactly," he said, his voice raising in excitement, a fanatical gleam shining in his eyes. "And I make myself the ruler of all, starting with this infinitesimal state, and moving on to the country and eventually the world. Can you imagine what we could accomplish without nationalism separating people into competing groups, without countries constantly fighting over resources? What if we had a leader with a true vision, one who could unify everyone and help to push humanity towards the next stage of its evolution, perhaps even towards colonizing the rest of the galaxy? But it all starts here, with you and me. So I'll ask you, would you join me?" I looked over at Dean, who stood close to me, looking pale and terrified. His eyes flicked from Roger to me, as if he were watching a sports game rather than an insane spectacle of death and black magic. "I'd rather die," I said, my heart pounding in my chest, my mouth going dry. Roger's face turned into a mask of fury as he screamed for his minions to attack. I fired the shotgun, but they swarmed in front of him, and the slug hit one of the burnt abominations in the chest instead. I swore, turning to run into the cabin. "Dean, let's go!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. I looked back and saw him standing there, shell-shocked and vacant-looking. "Dean," I said again, and his head snapped towards me. He began sprinting as the creatures closed in around him. I had already reached the cabin door and waited for him, breathing fast. I raised the shotgun and shot one of the creatures only a few feet behind Dean. The slug broke through its leg, sending splinters of bone and blue blood spurting into the earth below. Roger screamed in rage behind us, an incomprehensible roar of fury and madness. As if on cue, the creatures started screaming too, a shrill, maddening sound like someone being burned alive. They didn't seem to need to breathe, and the screaming went on for an inhuman length of time. I pulled Dean into the cabin quickly, slamming the door shut. A blood-stained padlock hung from a nail on the left side of the door. Looking quickly down, I saw a metal ring connecting the door to the wall. I pushed all my body weight against the door and took the open padlock in my hands, feeling the cold metal and the sticky, congealed blood. A sense of revulsion and horror overtook me, but I brushed it aside. With fumbling fingers, I slipped the padlock's shackle through the door's ring. But at that moment, a creature smashed into the other side, sending me sprawling on the ground. My shotgun went flying, sliding across the rough planks of the blood-stained floor, and stopping beneath the crucified body of the cop. His intestines swayed back and forth from the force of the gun. The door flew open, and I saw the leering faces and the red, bloody eyes of the abominations as they stared in, dripping long strands of saliva onto the dirt below. "Kill them all!" Roger shrieked in an insane voice, and the creatures rushed in. Dean began shooting, and I pulled out both my pistols, pressing the thumb levers on the holsters and releasing them. I started shooting madly, and their screams turned from fury to pain as they fell on the floor, their blue blood mixing with the red, coagulated stains below them. Within seconds, we had blocked the door with bodies. The cabin was small, barely even a room, though the wood was strong and fairly new, totally free from rot or holes. The only way in and out was through the door. With the narrow doorway blocked by a dozen blackened corpses, the rest of the creatures behind them tried to push through, but made no progress. One tried climbing over the pile of corpses, and I shot it in the head as soon as it peeked through. The rest didn't follow his example. I heard their high-pitched whines and screams outside, and Roger's much deeper one bellowing orders. "Get some dry leaves, twigs, and logs," he said. "If they won't come out, we'll burn them out. No witnesses, no loose ends." He said this last part as if to himself, his voice slowing down and becoming reflective, almost meditative in its quality. I turned to Dean, terrified and exasperated. His face reflected the emotions I felt. I regretted ever coming out here. We would most likely die, and my wife would be left in the hands of that psychopath outside, unless the police made some sort of unlikely break in the case and found her. "Well, Dean," I said slowly and sadly, "I think this is the end. Unless you have any plans. I sure don't. I guess we could start moving the corpses and try to fight our way out. That's probably what we'll have to do." Dean shrugged, his movements apathetic. He looked as if he also had given up hope. And then a miracle occurred. I heard a voice I had not heard in what seemed like eternity. It was the voice I had heard through my walkie-talkies, the one talking about dead stars. What had he said to me? As if in a flash, my subconscious repeated the strange words I had heard. I remembered, as if I were there, as if I had gone back in time and stood in the woods, calling for help with a mutilated corpse walking up behind me. "Get out of there and never come back. That cabin is for the sinners, those who worship the dead stars, those who have offered their lives to the Ancient Ones." The Ancient Ones, yes, that is what he, or it, had said. That stuck with me for some reason. I thought of Roger and his bizarre ideas on will. It reminded me of Nietzsche or Hitler. Hadn't they made a movie about him called The Triumph of the Will? Roger clearly had an obsession with the power of the will. In fact, I thought perhaps his obsession had come from black magic and Aleister Crowley, but I couldn't be sure. These thoughts all flashed through my head in a fraction of a second, and I thought, for a moment, I understood something ineffable some way out of this madness. But then it was gone, and I was just a scared man, sitting in a blood-soaked cabin, listening to an otherworldly voice. "You and your cult have trespassed on holy ground," the voice said, booming and godlike. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from all around me, and even inside the cabin itself. It shook the ground and sent the crucified body of the police officer swaying again, his disemboweled intestines slowly moving from side to side. "You have committed horrors and disrupted the peace of the dead. You and your creatures are doomed." "You have no power over me," Roger said, his voice seeming faint and almost childlike in comparison to the voice of the other. "Come out here and try it. Don't hide. Let's see your true form." The voice laughed. Dean began moving some of the corpses, trying to look out the door. I got up and went to his side. I saw the creatures surrounding the cabin had gone. They stood in a circle around Roger. His white face was the only color, a contrast to the blackened bodies of his minions, and the jet black robes that he wore. He looked like a dead star in infinite space, his skin lifeless and pale. "The Ancient Ones use you as a puppet," the voice said. I peered around and saw Dean doing the same, but I could find no source for it. "I too have an army, but mine are not drawn from the dead or the despicable art of necromancy. I use the forest and its many secrets. And who do you think is the stronger, the dead, or those with a connection to the living and breathing holy ground of this place?" Roger's eyes widened as hundreds of animals came out of the woods, a stampede of fur and feathers. I saw bears rushing in the front on all fours, approaching the emaciated, blackened victims of Roger and standing on their back legs, roaring and clawing. They swiped at their chests and faces, leaving deep gouges before lunging for their throats, and with a quick side-to-side motion, ripping the heads clean off. Roger turned and began to run, his remaining minions following suit. The animals chased after them, and within a minute, everything had started to go silent again. We kept pulling bodies out of the doorway, and by the time we got outside, no one was left except for some of the corpses of the monsters. We made it back to the cabin in record time, moving quickly with guns drawn. I saw police cars and FBI agents everywhere, and they started moving into the woods with searchlights and dogs. Antonio Brown was back, bandaged up and looking haggard and pale, but otherwise okay. He came up to me and Dean. "We know it was Roger. We're looking for him now," he said. "The FBI and state police just searched all known properties associated with him. We found the blood of your wife, Cal. I'm sorry. We didn't find a body, but it's a lot of blood. Too much for someone to lose and survive." His words stunned me into silence. I had held on to the glimmer of hope that Stacy was alive, that we would just need to capture Roger, and then we could find out where she was held prisoner. I started shaking and almost collapsed, but Dean caught me. He pulled me over to a bench and sat me down. "Take a minute," he said. "Just breathe." I sat there for what seemed like hours, watching the police and FBI agents pass by, going into and out of the woods. After a few hours, a team came back. Antonio was outside, talking to the police chief of the town. The team went up to him. "We found the body of Roger Gray," the police officer in charge said. "It looks like an animal attack. There were all sorts of blackened corpses around him. We don't really know what they are. It looks like he dug them out of a graveyard and burned them for some reason. The whole scene is, well, it's bizarre. We don't know what to make of it. There were no animals around when we went, but the tracks look like hundreds of bears, deer, owls, crows, and others passed right through there and attacked him." He shook his head. "I swear, this job gets weirder and weirder every day." I went home that night. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of Stacy in the bedsheets she had chosen, the pictures she hung on the wall, even the dishes she had washed a couple days ago, which seemed like years ago now. Little did I know, but I would see her again. My insomnia got worse after that night with Roger and the strange voice in the woods. I had always had trouble sleeping, but now I didn't sleep at all. I would sit up, night after night, drinking scotch and watching the 24-hour news channel, or just there and stare out the window. And then, after a week, I saw something strange. It was Stacy, my wife. I would have recognized her anywhere. But at the same time, it wasn't her. She had the same eyes, yes, the same hair, even the same clothes as the last time I had seen her. But now she was covered in blood and dragged one leg behind her, weeping and gnashing her teeth. I saw her lunge down and grab a raccoon from next to the garbage, biting its neck as it squealed and thrashed in her arms. After a few seconds, its thrashing died down and then stopped. She sucked the blood into her open mouth, her eyes shutting in pleasure. Then she dropped it, turned to me and smiled. I couldn't believe my eyes. I ran outside, but by the time I got there, she was gone. Only a dead raccoon with its neck broken remained at my feet. I took a leave of absence from work and began to search the woods. It was the only place I could think of, the forest where all this strangeness had begun. My intuition guided me, and my heart told me that if I was going to find Stacy, or what was left of her, it would be in that forest. I would return home every night, disconsolate and broken-hearted. After a month of this, I returned home and turned on the news, pouring myself a shot of whiskey and sitting back in my recliner. The corpses were found in a campsite next to Windermere Lake, within the Temple National Park, the broadcaster said, and I sat straight up in my chair. That was where I worked. I knew exactly where Windermere Lake was hadn't I hiked it every day. The lake itself was only 3 miles from the cabin where this had all started, that cabin of horrors and blood. They apparently had their throats mutilated and the blood drained from their bodies, the broadcaster continued. Authorities are tight-lipped on the mutilations and murders, but one officer told our reporter that 8 people are now dead or missing. The governor has responded, saying that they will close down the park if. I turned the TV off, getting up and going into my bedroom. I got dressed and put on my hiking shoes. After all, I now knew the reanimated corpse of my dead wife roamed the forest, attacking and killing innocent people. Roger was dead, but there was more work to do. I saw my wife's smiling face in my mind, and I remembered the way she smelled, like perfume and flowers. I quickly blinked back tears and grabbed my shotgun, strapping a pistol to my waist. No matter how long it took, I would bring her down, and hopefully free the forest of this evil. It's been 3 years now, and still, I haven't had success. To this day, I still go out at night, roaming the trails. I found bodies skinned alive with limbs twisted around tree branches, and campers with their faces eaten off, leaving just a mask of gore and bone behind. I'll never know if they're all from Stacy, or if something else lives there, but I have a mission, and I'm determined to fulfill it. I know my wife's soul has moved on, and that something else has taken over Stacy's body. Whatever shell remains is just an extension of Roger's satanic magic, his necromancy and evil. And I won't stop hunting until I know she is at peace. Thanks for listening. Hope you already fallen asleep. See you tomorrow at the same time.